think we can begin.
Okay, thanks very much, Convener. Firstly, I'd just like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the website of the Partnership for public viewing. I'm advised that apologies have been received from Dr. James Cotton for this morning. I'll now take a roll call of the membership, and I would ask that members confirm that they are present when I call their name. Councillor Lynn.
I'm here, thanks.
Trudy McClay.
I'm here, thanks, Willie.
Councillor Short.
Morning, here, thank you.
Okay, Bailey Wright.
Present.
Anne Cannon.
Present.
Paula McPherson.
Present.
Diane McCulloch.
Present, Willie, thank you.
Vicky Irons.
Yeah, present, Willie, thanks.
Dave Berry.
Present, Willie.
Dr. Wilson.
Yeah, present.
Sarah Dickey.
Present.
Raymond Marshall. So Mark Raymond is absent at present. Jim McFarlane.
Here, Willie.
Okay, Eric Knox.
Here, Willie.
Martin Sloan.
Yeah.
And Dr. Fletcher.
Present, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Item 2 then, before his declarations of interest, is were not any members have any declarations to make to the content of the agenda. Okay, and there being no declarations, I'll hand over to the chair in case he needs to make any opening remarks before we go on to the minute of the onto the membership item.
Yeah, a couple of things I'd like to say this morning.
Chair.
Firstly, we have 2 members for whom this is unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, their last meeting as members of the IJB. Dear Trudy, who is not on my screen at the moment, unfortunately, so I can't see your smiling face. This is Trudy McClay's last meeting as she is retiring from the board of NHS Tayside on 31st of March. And as the NHS Tayside rep on this board, this will be her final meeting before she's replaced by Pat Kilpatrick. I'm delighted to see that Pat's joining, but so sorry to see Trudy leave, because Trudy isn't just someone who pops up every 2 months, as far as I'm concerned, on the screen or in person as it used to be at a meeting. Trudy's someone who I have a lot of contact with out with these meetings, and much of that contact is instigated by Trudy because of the dedication she has and the interest that she has shown to this board and to the health of the people of Dundee. I'm really sad to see Trudy go, but there is one silver lining, that's an expression I keep using these days, in the cloud, in that Trudy will stay on as a member of the Charitable Funds Committee of NHS Tayside, which some of you may not have heard of, but it's a really important committee because NHS Tayside has a lot of money which has been left to them in people's wills, millions of pounds. And in fact, we had a development day yesterday, well, a development morning actually, I'm exaggerating there, for members of the Charitable Funds Committee, well, and the trustees who manage those funds. And there's some exciting plans for that money, which could certainly help the people of Dundee. So I really welcome the fact that Trudy will continue in that capacity, and I wish her all the best in her retirement. So thank you, Trudy, for everything you've done for the IJB and for Dundee in the last few years, and hope to see as much of you as I can, despite the fact that you won't be on this board any longer. That brings me to another retiree, Eric Knox, who has also made a fantastic contribution to this board in the time that he's been a member. Eric's one of these people who, as far as I'm concerned, it's quite rare for me not to have a bad word to say about anyone. But as far as Eric goes, I don't have a bad word to say about him. Just an all-round nice guy, and his stewardship of, now I have to get this right, Eric, because it's changed, DVVA, am I right? Has been impressive. His work in the Drugs Commission as a member has also been impressive, and like Trudy, I think Eric has showed his commitment to the people of Dundee, particularly those in need, of course, through his work. And Eric, you'll be similarly missed. So thank you for your contribution. What we would normally do at council meetings when we have retirees is have a round of applause, but I don't think it would work right somehow online. So if this were an in-person meeting, oh Donald, thank you for the clapping emoji. If this were an in-person meeting, that's what we'd certainly be doing, because both of you deserve a round of applause and more. So thank you very much. I'm wondering if I haven't got so carried away with the motion there. I'm wondering if I have any other opening remarks. I don't think anyone else is retiring.
Before you move on, could I just reiterate what you've said? Sure. Trudy, we've said goodbye to you at a number of meetings because you've had a lot of last meetings, and I'll not go over what I've said before, other than the fact that you will be sadly missed. But I'm hoping you're going to be around, and we'll go for lots of coffees, and you can keep us up to speed when you're not happy with something that we've been doing. I know that you will say that. And Eric, you've been a stalwart, and although you've only been on this committee for a short time, I'm sad to see you go, because I will miss your input from the community side of things and the third sector. Which I'm quite committed to. So sorry that you're going, but I dare say we're not going to hear the last for you either. So to you both, it's just something different, and age is only it's only a number, and don't think that you're past it or anything else. I know you're both going to go on to do different things, and I'll probably catch up with you at other places in the future. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Helen. Now, I don't think, no, Linda Gray obviously isn't here because she resigned effective from the 7th of February. So Linda's not here, but I'd also like to thank her for the contribution that she's made to the work of the IJB during her time as a member. I guess I'm moving on to the agenda here, but I'll just continue since I've mentioned one.
Ken, I've got my hand up. I wondered if I could come in.
Of course.
I just wanted to say, as a proud Dundonian, it's been a real privilege to serve the people of Dundee on the IJB, and I won't be disappearing because I'm also on the Fairness Board, so I'll still keep a finger in the pie. And I'm really sad to see Eric go as well. His contribution has been huge, and I'm hoping that I can still continue to work with any of the DBVA staff in any capacity. Not full time, I have to say.
Thank you for that, Trudy. Donald?
I think Martin was before me, to be fair, so maybe let Martin have first go.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry about that, Martin.
That's all right, Chair. I too would like to express my shock at the retirement of Eric. I didn't know that he was at that position in life where he felt that he needs to retire. It's always sad to see good people go, and I hope that I'll see Eric in other work outside of the board and other items. In terms of Trudy has been a true friend to me and to carers in Dundee, and when I heard her plan to retire, I was sad then, and I'm sad now, and I hope that Trudy is doesn't disappear too quickly and doesn't disappear from our lives, because she is really a fantastic person. And in terms of Linda Gray, who has also decided to bring her time with this board to an end, again, it's another true friend of not just the carers, but also of the people who she has worked with over the many years that she has been involved in stuff, not just with carers, but with also with the patient panels as well. So it's a sad day to see three fantastic people retire from this committee.
Thank you for that, Donald.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I mean, you know, I echo everything that everyone has said so far. I'm not actually saying goodbye to Trudy at all, because I'm the chair of the Charitable Funds Committee, so I'm delighted I'll continue to get her input in that forum as we spend the many millions that Ken mentioned a minute or two ago. I did just want to ask, with obviously, sorry to see Eric leaving the scene here. I think it's really important that we continue to get third sector input. That's part of the whole proposition of IJBs, that the voluntary sector has a voice. And I was just going to ask what the process is for the successor to him.
Well, all I know is that notification of her replacement and of Eric's replacement will be notified in due course. Vicky's hand is up. I wonder, in addition to whatever you're going to say, Vicky, you could maybe let us know what the procedure is. Because you're up next, Eric. Sorry, Vicky.
Apologies, I think Eric was maybe going to come in on that. I guess I was going to wait until item 6 to use the floor's kind of privilege to make some remarks, but I think I'll probably say those remarks just now, Chair, if that's okay with you. I mean, I've had the privilege of working alongside Trudy and Eric throughout my role in Angus as Chief Officer, but certainly since my transfer to be Chief Officer of Dundee City. And I have to say, working alongside for me is the best description of the relationship that's been built along those lines and over that period. And I feel very, very privileged to have worked with two individuals who couldn't have better knowledge, who couldn't be more invested in the future and the development of services across Dundee City. And it's been a real privilege to work shoulder to shoulder with both Trudy and Eric throughout this time. And that's what it's felt like. It's sometimes very difficult to get the relationship right between a chief officer and the governing body, particularly the members on that body, because we always are subject to scrutiny, question and challenge. But that challenge, from my perspective, has always been fair, and it's always felt like we've had the full support of both Trudy in her role as chair and vice chair, and Eric in terms of his leadership across the third sector. So I just wanted to formally note my thanks. And like others, I will very much miss not just the kind of professional support that's been available to me throughout, but also the friendship, I think, that's developed over that period of time. And hopefully, like others, I'll still manage to keep in touch.
Thank you, Vicky. I'll now bring in Eric.
Thanks, Ken. I'm a bit overwhelmed by some of the comments there, but thanks very much, folk. I'm going to miss this greatly. It's not been an easy decision for me. But just to answer one of the questions about replacement for myself, it would normally be whoever comes into my role within DVVA that would take this role for the third sector, and I think that's what's happened up until now. At the moment, I won't be leaving, and there'll be a gap before the person comes in. The job advert is out now. So Christina Cooper, who some of you all know well, will be taking my place on this until such time as the new person comes into the role for DVBA. So that's just to give you some reassurance that you'll get somebody who's got a really good knowledge of Dundee and has worked within the third sector for a long time to represent the sector. So thanks very much, folks.
Thank you very much, Eric. So,
okay, thanks very much, Chair. If you're happy to continue. Okay, with item 3 having been noted, the changes in membership, all those have been noted in the resignations, and of course with Eric Knox's position, it takes you on to item 4. And first, we've got a minute of the previous meeting of the Integration Joint Board held on 15th of December, which is attached for approval.
okay, can we just go through this? I'll just go through this page by page. If anyone has any comments they wish to make, please do so. Sorry, I'll just have to collect my papers here. Sorry, I'm just looking for the front page of the minutes here. Okay. First page. And now someone has, there's two hands up. Annie?
Ken, I was present, but I'm not there on the minute, but I was there.
Can that be added, please, Willie? And Helen? You're muted, Helen.
I've jumped ahead of myself. My question's for 4A, sorry.
Okay.
Not in the minutes.
Are there any other comments on the minutes, or can these be approved? Yeah, these can be approved. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Your item 4A having been approved, it then takes you on to item 4B, which is the action tracker.
Yeah. Any comments on the action tracker? We've still got 33 actions here, but obviously some of them can be taken off as they're completed. So I think the next meeting will be a bit shorter. Bailey, right? You're muted, Helen.
Sorry, I don't know what I pressed there, but I thought I had. Thank you, convener, for letting me ask this question. It's just in general, probably most of this report is about people, and a lot of it's about mental health, drugs, alcohol, etc. And I was looking at item 13 on it, the financial monitoring position, and I was just wondering, it's not really about COVID, but I've been discovering what's available for social prescribing, and I think it's probably an important part of the future, especially with people that have had problems with COVID, because I've been volunteering at different areas and have discovered that social prescribing and encouraging people out to different areas, activities, actually has helped them. So I'm just wondering how much we're spending at the moment, Dave, on social prescribing, and is there a chance in the future that the government will put extra money into social prescribing so that it can make a difference for people that are suffering with COVID, long COVID, and mental health problems? Thanks.
Dave, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Bailey Wright, for the question. Yeah, we spend around about £500,000 a year through the Community Link Worker team. That's our kind of direct kind of service that we provide from the partnership itself. And the Community Link Workers work in association with most of the GP practices across Dundee. Funding comes from a kind of variety of sources. So the Action 15 Mental Health Fund kind of supports the team, as does the Primary Care Improvement funding. And we also have some core funding from the Health and Social Care Partnerships kind of core budget. At this stage, we're kind of consolidating what we've got in terms of that. The community link workers have obviously had to work differently over the COVID period, so we're kind of assessing the kind of remobilisation element of that and how that'll work. Don't think there's anything that I'm certainly kind of cited on in the pipeline from a Scottish Government perspective around social prescribing, but we continue to kind of look at areas like the Primary Care Improvement Funding, Action 15, etc., for opportunities to enhance and expand the service accordingly. So hopefully that kind of gives you a good overview there, Bailey Wright.
Next up is Trudy.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that Helen asked that question about social prescribing. It's quite useful because I'm now staying on the Charitable Funds Committee, and we have supported things like men's sheds, which are hugely important for mental ill health and support for those who do have mental ill health. And I think it's very important that the IJB know that you can approach the CFC by application. You'll find an application form. And David Shaw is on the call, I see, and I'm sure with social prescribing there must be many areas that you would want to approach the CFC to support. One caveat, we don't support staff salaries, but we will support projects that we see are going to be very useful.
Thanks for that, Trudy. Eric?
Thanks, Ken. No, just on social prescribing, we've got to remember as well that a lot of the third sector services out there, part of their core work, although it's not branded under social prescribing, is social prescribing, and a lot of the having that strength within the sector that we've talked about before in Dundee is really important going forward. And I've spoken before at this meeting just about some of the pressures that are on third sector services currently. And sustainability around about them. So that big bulk of third sector services that deal with people, they are doing on a day-to-day basis social prescribing, whether it's branded up like that or not. And Sheila Allen did a piece of work probably about 2 or 3 years ago where we surveyed all third sector services across the city to see who was doing social prescribing. There was a considerable number.
Thank you, Eric. Councillor Short?
Just want to check, is this the same as the NHS Innovation Fund? Is that the same fund?
No, it's not. Can I come in?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's not the same fund, but I'm sure that Donald would come in because he's chair.
Yeah, thanks. If I may, and I'm sorry, I tapped a question in the chat because I'm really not quite sure where we are on the agenda now. I thought we were doing the action tracker, but the Community Innovation Fund, which Lynn, I think, which Councillor Short is referring to, is funded by the Charitable Funds Committee. So for relatively small scale community projects up to £25,000, the Community Innovation Fund is the way to go. Richard McIntosh, I'm sure, is a well-kent face to many of you. So he is a really good route into that source of funding. So hopefully that clarifies for everyone. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's a great clarification. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we are still on the action tracker. Helen asked a question relating to one of the action points. The only comment I have to make on the action points is though from action point 6 to action point 9, referring to the suicide prevention event, which was held on the 23rd of November. It says that a record of the outcome is being produced and will be shared once available. I'm wondering where we are on producing that, given that the event was 3 months ago. Can anyone comment? Or I just chase that up.
Ken, it's Diane.
Hi, Diane.
Hi. Yeah, I checked with Arlene around that. It's not sitting with us to produce. It's sitting out with the Health and Social Care Partnership with the people who led the event. So we're still waiting on that. But as soon as we have it, we will make sure that the report comes to you.
Thank you. It's because it says it'll inform the completion of a final draft for the Dundee plan in April of this year, which isn't so far away. So maybe someone could contact them and ask them to get a move on. Thank you for that, because it is a very important issue, suicide prevention. Anyone else have any comments on any of the action points? No, we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. With the action tracker having been noted, it takes you on to item 5, Performance and Audit Committee, and you've got the minute of the meeting of 2nd of February, which is submitted for information and record purposes.
Yep, these are for noting and will be approved at the next meeting of the Performance and Audit Committee. Can't be approved here. So can we move on, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It takes you on to item 5B, which is accompanying Chairman's shares report.
Yeah, Vicky Irons, I think you'd like to come in at this point to make some comments.
No, that was for item 6. Sorry, Chair.
We are on item 6, but actually you it was 60. I think you wanted to come into your
That's
right.
correct. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is yeah, carry on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so thank you, Chair, and I'm conscious that members will be used to me having a few words towards the beginning of our meetings, just to kind of give a general update in terms of COVID and also our management of pandemic, both in terms of mobilisation, remobilisation and recovery. So I wanted to take the opportunity today to really mark a significant change, and I think a change that we can all be proud of, and a change that I guess signals that we are hopefully coming towards the end of the original burst of activity that was required around the pandemic, and showing signs of recovery across our systems. So I'd like to take the opportunity today to reflect back really to the very first weekend that it became apparent that we had a significant issue in terms of the emergence of COVID across our systems, and particularly around the establishment of the Community Assessment Centre in Dundee. So I'll pass over to David Shaw in a moment to offer his own personal reflections. But I'd like to take us back to that first weekend when it became apparent that not only did we have the presence of COVID within the city, I think we were the first recorded case of COVID in Tayside, but we were also seeing COVID infections across our workforce, and particularly in the GP workforce, where a number of practices were affected in the very, very early days. But despite all of that, and despite what I can only express to IJB members as the level of anxiety and concern that there was across the system of what we were dealing with, particularly in terms of the unknown entity, about the severity of the pandemic, all of the practitioners across Tayside came together to set up the Community Assessment Centre in that first weekend. We saw a 700% increase in the number of people contacting out of hours for support and advice. Many of those people were just anxious. However, the Community Assessment Centre was there and able to respond to them. And for the ingenuity shown across the service, and I know that David probably doesn't take compliments that well, but I know that David probably worked day and night for that first week without respite, without rest, and was present to enable us to get the arrangements put into place. Then from the ingenuity that existed in terms of the practitioners and the services actually just acquiring quite temporary, I think, what I would describe as gazebos to make sure that we could have a kind of drive-through facility for those people with symptoms, and eventually to the whole system, particularly across the King's Cross site, amending their working practices and being able to support the establishment of this centre. So I wanted the IJB to take the opportunity this morning to pass on thanks to all of those involved. They are listed in the agenda note that we have today, and there will probably be more people that we haven't listed who've made this possible. But they have ensured that we've had a system and an assessment centre which has been functional across all of Tayside throughout, and has really pulled on the partnership working across all of general practice and all of the community services that we have available to us. And I think without that, we wouldn't have had the level of support and caring that has been made available to the people across Dundee City throughout the pandemic. So I wanted to note that thanks, and we will be writing to the main leaders and the main stakeholders involved in that on behalf of the IJB to pass on our thanks. With that, if that's okay, David, and hopefully I haven't embarrassed you too much, I think it would be great if the IJB could hear some of your own reflections on the journey so far.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I guess just to set the scene, back in start of March, we had all the stuff coming out of Italy. We had a wide-scale infection for which there were no real treatments that we were aware of, apart from high-flow oxygen and ventilation for patients who are sick enough to require it. This was before we developed treatments such as dexamethasone, and we had no vaccination. In the UK, we were watching carefully to see what had happened. There were little outbreaks popping up, and in Dundee, we already had one practice down at Broughty Ferry, where I think at a meal of 21 people who had been celebrating a retirement, 19 managed to contract COVID. And they had one working GP who managed to keep the service going there, by buddying up with Grove Practice. And that model of practicing supporting each other is one that we've certainly had to rely on more than once during the pandemic. So on the weekend of the 14th, at the 8 of hours, it became rapidly apparent that we were losing control as a nation of COVID, and we needed to radically rechange what it was that we were going to do in order to make sure that patients were seen safely. The key thing was to make sure that those people who had medical needs that were not COVID related were not going to have their care sacrificed, and that those people who did have COVID were going to be seen professionally in a way that meant that they could be dealt with swiftly and safely. I was working that weekend at the 8 of hours. I do that once a month. And myself and the other leads down at King's Cross had a sort of scratching the head session. And we reckon that the safest way of seeing somebody without having to decontaminate the waiting room afterwards was to not have a waiting room, but to have their car. And given that it's bloody cold in March in Scotland, and given that occasionally it has been known to rain in Scotland as well, we thought that the only way that we could do that safely was to get a tent that could take a car into it. We didn't have the funds to acquire a tent, so I got my credit card out and I went through the internet. Pardon me. I'll come to this in a minute. I went down to Machine Mart, and we acquired our first tent there. One of the out of hours drivers has a landscaping business, and he picked it up, and we had the whole thing set up for our first patients later on that evening. We had a look at the facility that we were in. King's Cross is an excellent community-based facility. It runs dental, it runs physio, it runs audiology. It's got numerous exits and entrances, and we worked out how it is that we could safely have different pathways of care. That meant that those people who might have COVID, those people who might have COVID but needed an indoor assessment, and those people who didn't have COVID could be in separate streams using the various different exits and entrances and the various different rooms that we had. And we chucked everyone else out because it wasn't really safe. They went with very good grace. I'm not sure if I would have left quite as smartly, but as I said, they supported us by not being there and doing their work from home, and that was very, very difficult, I think, for them. And I think hats off to those services that have sacrificed their space to allow this to take place. That was the out of hours solution. We needed a solution that was going to work through the day as well. So over the course of the following week, we communicated with all of the practices in Tayside to work out how we could keep practices safe, doing the thing that they do best, which is speaking to their patients to give them medical support, but keeping the COVID patients out of practice. And the reason for that is we look after everyone in Tayside, and amongst the everyone are the immunosuppressed, the frail, and those who, if they had a whiff of COVID, things were going to end very badly for them. The only way that we could staff a COVID assessment centre was by drawing on the GP resource. So what we needed to do was to get GPs to volunteer to do this. There was no statutory mechanisms. There was a lot of persuading going on. But it became apparent that this was the most sensible, most efficient, and most effective way of doing business. So GPs came on board. Those staff who had been freed up from other duties because their service has been stand down stood up for us. So we were very well supported by the dental nurses particularly. And as soon as we had demonstrated that our tent solution worked out, the estates guys came down and bought up all of the remaining similar tents in Scotland, which caused interest elsewhere. And we had, I think, at peak 12 tents down at King's Cross. Now, we ran that system pretty tightly all through lockdown. lockdown came to an end and COVID started to recede, we reflected on those changes and we felt that perhaps we could start to think about remobilisation again. It's important that we've got good use of our community hospital, and I was very keen to make sure that physio could do stuff that physio needed to do, that X-ray could do things that X-ray could do, that dentistry could restart. So we gradually retreated and into a smaller and smaller footprint. Now that we've got vaccinations, we've got effective treatments for coronavirus, we're at the stage where we no longer require a through-the-day service. We have managed to redesign most practices so that they've got safe ways of seeing people who've got COVID. And we've got new pathways of care that enable people to do self-care and remote working and to provide that which is required closer to where patients are. What that has done is it has meant that we've been able to free up those those doctors who are working at COVID Assessment Centre to help out for the moment in helping contact those patients who are most vulnerable and who have coronavirus, who may benefit from the new monoclonal antibody treatments. So their GP skills are really helping out the respiratory physicians who otherwise would be overwhelmed. Our process for making sure that patients who need these monoclonals get them is, I think, again, nation leading. We've had more than 200 patients through that pathway, with the majority of that, I think, through our GPs. And it has kept that very specialist work out of general practice, which has meant there's been more time for GPs to do their work. Now, I did say I was going to come back to this. Just about 2 years ago on my birthday, if anyone wants to send me a card, I came down with COVID, and I've just come down with it again. So if you see me sniffling or coughing, that's because I'm working from home, using the sort of systems that we have developed over COVID, which means that yesterday I was doing my morning surgery, and this evening I'll be signing into the out of hours. So I think we have a more resilient general practice in some respects. I think there's another item coming up to say that we're not resilient in every respect, but certainly we are more resilient in certain respects than we were at the start of COVID. There have been a lot of good things that have come out of it. There's been a lot of difficulties with it, not least for patients. But I think it's been a sorry.
Okay. Judy, you were...
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and thank David for his work. I think it has been heroic, and Vicky and all of the teams. And I think without the dedication and the commitment of all of the teams, including Shona, I see Shona coming up as well, I think Dundee would have been in a poorer place. I think our citizens should be very grateful for all of the work that's been done. I'm sorry to hear that David has COVID, and I hope you recover well and quickly. But I did go up to King's Cross to visit some of the teams there, and I would agree with David, it was absolutely freezing, and the dental teams were particularly cold. So hats off to them as well. Thanks, Chair.
Can I bring in Shona Hyman, please?
Yeah, I mean, I was there for the first probably 6 to 8 months helping to manage the service, and it was a really demanding time. I mean, David's highlighted the huge number of people, and I know Vicky said that we'll be in touch with key groups, but there were some standout people. I mean, Trudy's picked out the dental staff, really supported across a whole load of teams in NHS Tayside, but we had highly skilled dental technicians managing and supporting people that were arriving outside, and all through through the winter for the whole period. They've only been away the last few months. So it's just one example of where people really worked hard. They were dealing with people that were anxious, distressed, particularly in the early days where we really didn't know what this meant. It has had a negative impact on some of the services, but they've got up and running and back into the building now. Estates have been a huge asset in this. So there's just been a huge number of people. Again, people will be aware of this from other bits of the system. Folk that retired and came back to help. So we had one practice nurse who'd retired, who came back for a 3-month contract and I think has been there for 20 months and only recently stopped. So people's dedication to support people of Dundee has been huge, but the leadership that was shown in the early phase, I know Vicky's reflected that already, was really significant, and I know that the Tayside model is really highly thought of, and we've been really lucky in Dundee to retain that and work with our practices to develop a system going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to offer my thanks to all those who made the COVID assessment centre the really valuable facility that it has been. You know, they had the weather to contend with, as David has said, working outside, and also the community anxiety around COVID, and they were exposing themselves to people who potentially had COVID on a daily basis. So yeah, I think all of us would like to send our thanks to them, and I know Vicky that you're going to contact them. So thanks for that, and I'm sorry to hear, David, that you've come down with COVID again. I hope you make a swift recovery. But thanks for joining the meeting this morning despite your illness. Can we move on, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Takes you on to the additional item 6A, Rye Hill Medical Centre. This is a verbal update.
Yeah, Vicky, can I bring you in on this, please?
Yes, of course. And as Shona has still on screen, I might defer to Shona also just to give us a very quick update. I would just like to make mention of the comments that are also in the written part of the meeting in the commentary section, though, and fully support those in just reiterating thanks and sending best wishes to David in terms of recovery from what is now his second dose of COVID. I think it just goes to show not only the standard of David's leadership and how lucky we are to have him, but also the personal impact that COVID's had across many members of our team and their families. And I think we shouldn't be too quick to forget that. What I maybe should have also said in that previous item, sorry, Chair, is that, if you like, the lack of the requirement for us to have a COVID assessment centre now is showing that we are seeing really positive signs of recovery across the city. However, and as David's probably very skillfully demonstrated today, it's still very much present in our communities and across our team members. So we must make sure that we still exercise our own personal judgment when it comes to protection, not only of the people that we provide care for, but our teams that provide that care. So I just wanted to mention that. The second item on the agenda today is in connection with the briefing that we sent round to IJB members about Rye Hill Health Centre in the West End. And I really just wanted to have an opportunity today to mention the circumstances in terms of the current GP practice and the arrangements that we'll be putting in place to look at options for being able to provide future primary care services to that registered population. I wasn't intending to go into that in any level of detail today because you will have had the briefing that's been circulated, but I don't know, Shona, if you just want to give a very quick summary of the circumstances and possibly the timescales that IJB members can expect to see some options emerging around the future care there. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm sure David will add to this. So unfortunately, the practice are in a position where they've been unable to recruit GP vacancies for some period of time. That's not unusual currently, and it's part of the reason that people be very aware from the media of the ongoing challenges with GP staffing. It's part of the reason why we've got primary care improvement plan developments to try and support a wider team approach to supporting people's care needs in an appropriate way and in a timely way. The practice had reached a decision, so they've handed back the contract, so the current GPs will cease on the 30th of June. but we need to look at what option is the best option for providing ongoing care for people that are registered with the practice. That's, as you can imagine, not a straightforward process because we've got no real capacity in the system. So we are looking at what the best option would be, and we're working with a number of people to do that. We've particularly engaging with the other practices at the moment. So Ryhill's in cluster 4. So we had a meeting with the GPs and key staff from that cluster yesterday, and we'll continue to have that dialogue. David, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yes, thanks, Shona. Yeah, it's always unfortunate when a practice finds itself in difficulty. As you'll see from the briefing, we have been working with Ryhill over a period of several years now to try and support them. We have used a Career Start GP. This is one of these GPs that NHS Tayside employs, and that's the use of to a local practice to try and add to their resilience. We've popped in an experienced practice manager in to help to try and support them. But unfortunately, it is very difficult to recruit general practitioners. This is not the only practice in Tayside that is, unfortunately, in this position. I've been dealing with a frequent practice in Angus that similarly has difficulties, and there are other practices that are also in a fragile state. The thing that we need to achieve is to make sure that we've got continued high-level general medical services available to patients, ideally local to where it is that they live, and that any decision does not destabilise the provision of general medical services to a greater degree within the town. I'm involved in this with 2 hats on, as well as being the Associate Medical Director for Dundee Health and Social Care Partnership. I'm also interim primary care Associate Medical Director. So what my responsibility there is really about good general practice care. I think at the heart of all of this, we want sustainable services for patients local to where they live within the community. We need to critically look at every option that is available to find the least bad option. If we can keep the practice going, that would be ideal, but that will be a very difficult thing to achieve. Short of that, there are a variety of other options, and we need to explore them to make sure that we do the best thing that can be done within the circumstances. We have a relatively narrow time window. 30th of June is the date at which that concludes. We've had our first meeting with local practices already. We've got, I think, 2 more meetings this week, and a final meeting shortly following that. There'll be a wider communication following that set of meetings with all practices to see if any of them are able to offer more specific help. And that should mean that the IJB should be in the position to have the clearest view on what can be done. And then that should give us the best opportunity to choose what should be done. And then we would take that to NHS Tayside, who ultimately hold the contract in order to work out what's for best. So I think there's a lot more. This is very much the start of a process which I think will move reasonably quickly. And I think I'll stop there.
Oh, Ken, you were on mute. Were you? I was only going to add the timescales because Vicky had asked me to clarify the timescales. So
I'm on mute, sorry.
Yeah, the intention is to bring a paper back with a recommendation to the April IJB.
That's good. So I'm glad that you're on the case. What I was going to ask was, I think there's around about 5,000 patients on the roll at Ryhill. Do you know what the geographical spread of those patients is? Because I think it's Dundee tradition that you stick with the doctor that you first registered with. So you'll find that people in the west end of the city are sometimes registered with a GP in the east end, and so on and so forth. Do you know how widespread the patient roll is at Ryhill?
Absolutely. There are 5,500 patients currently registered as of 1st of January, and they are scattered across Dundee, the Carse of Gary, and Southern Angus. We have a scatter map, and we also have information broken down by data zone. The demographics, because Rye Hill is in a student area, about a third of the population are between the ages of 20 and 30. But it encompasses all age groups. And I would say the big half of the population is in the West End. But absolutely, we've got patients from Errol through to Montefieth and up past Ochterhouse and Points North. So it's a widespread thing, and that involves conversations not just with practices within Dundee, but practices without Dundee, to see what the where the best solutions lie. So I think acquiring the best information has been the first step in order to work out what the best solution is.
Thank you for that. This is certainly a big job that you have there. Councillor Short, I'll bring in you. Then I think that's it for this item.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, it's probably been covered. Mine was really just to do with the fact that it was in the West End, and it's obviously a very transient area because of the student populace. So it was just around churn, but you've sort of almost covered that. All those students leaving and going living in the suburbs by the sounds of it, of the Carse and further north. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone who contributed to that update. Can we move on, please, Willie?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Item 7 then before you, the Dundee Adult Support and Protection Committee mid-term report. This is for noting.
Yes, I noticed we have Elaine Torrance here. Are you able to speak to this, Elaine?
Yes, thank you very much.
See before you begin, Elaine, and thanks for coming. I noticed Bailey Wright's hand is up, so I'll just. Do you have your hand up to ask something before we move on, Helen?
Yes, Ken. Obviously, some of these reports that are on your agenda today were on the council committee the other night. And while I know it's probably a bit boring for yourself, Ken, and for Lynn to listen to these questions again, I think it's very important on the subject matter that the questions are asked again. And I have a question for Elaine. So I don't know if you want me to ask it first so that she can include it in what she's actually saying.
Yeah, go ahead, Helen.
Okay, right. Obviously, it's more or less the same questions, Elaine, that I actually asked you the other night. And I think the annual report clearly reflects lots of progress that's been made across the agencies in the last year. However, Dundee City Council's Scrutiny Committee recently considered an internal audit report that highlighted some outstanding areas for improvement in relation to the adult support and protection practices within the health and social care. Can you as independent convener comment on how you're ensuring that the issues identified in that report are fully addressed? And also, the annual report does not include information about how concerns for adults who live in care homes have been considered by the Adult Support and Protection Committee during the pandemic, which obviously has been a big area of concern for the public. There seemed to be, for a while, a lot of things in the press about it. But could you tell us more about what role the Adult Protection Committee has in ensuring adults at risk are protected in these settings in the care homes? At section 4.4.1, the report notes a thematic review of fire deaths and the fact that it's being completed. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the findings from this work and how the partners are addressing these issues. As I say, I think it's important work you do, and we're grateful to the staff who have to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Elaine, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to include as much as I can. Just I want to keep my kind of comments relatively short, but I'll try and pick some of those up as I go through. So just first of all, thanks for the opportunity to introduce this report. This is a mid-term report. Independent chairs or conveners have to produce a biennial report, which is every 2 years. But we feel we're very clear that we think we should be reporting every year to appropriate governance bodies such as the IJB. So, this is our mid-term report. It's also quite timely to be introducing it today, because on Sunday, funny day to launch this, but there was a National Adult Protection Day, and there was some national coverage, and we're very keen to raise the profile of adult support and protection. And we have done some local communication out just this week, and we've also got some events for staff that are happening as well this week, all through this week. So it's probably a good time to be looking at this report. The report covers the period April 20 to March 21, and it covers the achievements. And clearly it's the report, and it includes a whole range of agencies, including health, local authority, third sector, and other partners who are around the table. The report identifies a number of achievements, such as a learning and development programme, which is very thorough, and I think is well received by staff. We've been looking at improved data collation and collection of data, but also scrutiny of that data, looking at what's telling us and asking the so what questions. And I think that's improved through the committee's work over the last period of time. We're very grateful for NHS investment in additional posts, and there's now a team who are supporting this work, and that's been very, very valued, and I think will help us take and drive improvements forward over the next year. So that's been a very positive development. I think, as was just noted, there is a thematic review of fire deaths that we completed. So just to answer one of your questions, Helen, that really identified a number of things that we needed to be taking forward. One was around being clearer about evacuation plans when people were in their own homes and perhaps had mobility issues that they were struggling to get out of their homes. So really focusing along with our housing colleagues and others around evacuation plans. Improving the plans for that at discharge planning arrangements. A number of people have been discharged from hospital, and actually looking at that as an element of the discharge plan right at the point of discharge, we felt was very important. That came through the review. Being clearer about the risks and how we identify and deal with the risks, but also recognising how difficult it is sometimes to balance that risk of harm with people's determination to live in their own homes, even when they've got significant challenges to do so. So trying to get that balance right, I think, is really important. So we're sharing all those findings with staff and teams, and making sure that we have a clear plan and we're addressing those areas. So hopefully that gives a flavour of some of the work that's coming out of that. There's been a lot of talk at this meeting about the response to the pandemic, and of course there's a section in this report about that and how people have stepped up and dealt with that. And of course we have to recognise that for adults, families, this has been a very, very difficult period. They've been facing financial challenges, illness, and all of those kind of challenges, and it's had often an impact on their mental health, and also a lot of anxiety, and particularly for older people, and isolation at home, not seeing people and being very, very, very prone to potential harm. So we have been again looking at the committee's met much more regularly. We've been looking at public's awareness raising, so communities were aware of this matter and could perhaps raise concerns if they had concerns about people living alone or struggling to cope with all of this. And they're very much focused on hidden harm. How do we make sure that we identify people who are in hidden harm, particularly worried about scams and phone calls to people who are living at home, which we know has been a challenge. And that whole issue of financial abuse has been, one of our kind of key areas of concern. Just to pick up perhaps there the care home issue, the committee has a risk register, and one of our risks was very much care homes and what was happening to people in care homes. But we have to recognise that is not the responsibility of the committee. It really is the responsibility of the health and social care partners and partners around this table. However, at committee, we were very, very keen to hear what was happening in care homes, just to make sure that there wasn't any concerns that would be coming through under the legislation and raising concerns about that. And Diane attended the committee. She's on our committee and regularly updated us about the support and provision of PPE, for example, and making sure that health and safety appropriate measures were in place. So we were reassured, although it was always on our agenda to check that out and make sure there wasn't any particular issues that were being highlighted. So we did have a look at that. We have a look at data, and you'll see from the data that adult concerns continue to rise. And although a substantial number of those don't meet the threshold for formal investigation, I can assure you that all are followed up and appropriate support is offered, because I think the figures look quite scary when you look at that and then what happens. But we are looking at thresholds and how we make sure that they're appropriately taken forward. You could also see in the work in the future plan that we have to make sure we address all the inspection requirements. Again, that's one of your questions. I think the scrutiny report did highlight that perhaps some of the areas for improvement during the inspection had not been fully implemented, such as things like the implementation of chronologies and some of the other areas. So we've now got a revised plan. We've got a clear focus on that. There's a number of reasons for that. Partly because some of it we took on a public protection and implemented some of it in a phased way, but the adult protection perhaps was due to follow on. But we do have a clear plan. We're looking at things like outcomes, making sure that we get feedback from people who've been involved in adult support protection to check if it's actually made any difference to their lives and that they do feel safer. I think that's important. Unpaid carers as well are clearly part of that process, that we get support and the right support in the right time for them. And a little bit of work on quality assurance, making sure that we at committee get the assurance that we require in terms of things right across the multi-agency approach to this. So, for example, case file auditing and an element such as that. So I think I've tried to pick up some of your points, Councillor Bailey-Wright, hopefully. Diane's on the call and can help with some of any additional questions, but I'll just stop there. Hopefully that's given a flavour of some of the issues that have been in the report. Thank you.
It certainly has, and thank you for that, Elaine. I have a number of people with their hands up, so I'll bring in Trudy first, please.
Hi, Elaine. As always, amazing, sterling work that you do. Thank you very much for that. My first question, Chair, is it okay if I ask 3 questions or make comment? My first question is that the new regulations re smoke and fire alarms, it harks back to Helen's question about the thematic report. I wonder if the new regulations with smoke and fire alarms could reduce the number of fire deaths in the city. However, I do have a concern that the cost is significant per household. I'll give an example, my own example, 3 fire alarms, 1 smoke detector and 1 CO2 monitor were £330. And that's a significant cost for those on low income. And just because you're maybe elderly and you're living in a large property, it doesn't mean that you're financially stable. You may be house rich, but money poor. And I wonder how our residents over all of Dundee will be able to afford this hit on their finances. I do see also there would be a subsequent cost to Dundee Council in their property portfolio, but not everybody lives in a council house. Some are rented. So it's a difficult area, and it's one that we should consider. On page 49 in the Appendix 1, the other comment about the how would you evacuate in different homes. The fire brigade do have a fire prevention scheme, and they will come out to homes, and I think it's important to note that they will come out, they'll discuss the fire needs and the fire alarm needs, but they will also give advice on evacuation from your property. So that's something that people can do. They can contact the fire brigade, not on 999, I have to say. On page 49, Appendix 1, I note the reference to partnership working between Angus and Dundee. Why not P&K? Because this is a Pan-Tayside adult protection. And I'm wondering, do P&K have a standalone design for public protection? And if so, how can learning and best practice be shared across Tayside? I do understand that the programme has been endorsed and that delivery has been agreed Pan-Tayside, but has there been any P&K input? That's another question. And also, Elaine, on page 56, I have to say that the integrated impact assessment, I was very pleased to see the focus on the impact assessment, which is much stronger. The focus, this is particularly noticeable in the fairness and poverty impact inclusion. I was very pleased to see that.
Okay, thank you. Shall we try and deal with some of those questions just now?
I think maybe there's an issue with the internet.
Can I come in and answer some of those questions and as best we can?
You can, although I expect yeah. She may come back, but if you want to speak in the end, yeah.
We can try and cover some. So obviously the regulations around fire alarms, the Fire and Rescue Department used to actually provide some alarms to individuals as part of their assessment. I see Jenny's on the call. She may have a more up-to-date position, but certainly we could find out what the current position is in terms of support around the alarms. You mentioned in regards to the work across Angus, Dundee and Perth and Kinross. So sometimes work happens between a couple of agencies, but there's a lot of cross Tayside work that goes on in regards to adult support and protection and indeed the whole public protection programme, Trudy. In this particular case, it happened to be Angus and Dundee that were working on this particular aspect of training. Once we'd kind of got some of that up and running, then we looked at Perth, but there are occasions when Angus and Dundee or Dundee and Perth will work together to develop and support pieces of work, but we do have a very robust Tayside programme of support, considering how we work with across Peace, our partners in both the Police Scotland and our health colleagues all currently work at a Tayside level, but feed into all the 3 local areas of work. And you'll be aware, of course, that there's also now a Tayside Public Protection Executive Group, which all the kind of key partners sit on. So it works in lots of ways. I wouldn't read anything into the fact that Perth and Kinross weren't part of that particular piece of work. They certainly looked at the work that was produced between Dundee and Angus and agreed that. And we'll continue to kind of work as best we can across Tayside about focusing on areas where gaps may be identified. I think that was your main things, Trudy. There was the fire protection and the input to training. Was there a third one? Sorry.
No, the third one was just the impact assessment. I was very pleased to see the inclusion of the poverty bit of it.
Thank you.
Apologies for dropping off that minute. It always happens, doesn't it? But thanks, Diane, you've answered all of those questions, great. But just to also, so the independent chairs and lead officers do meet regularly across Tayside and actually work together, identify themes and work together. So just to reassure you, there is good collaborative working right across Tayside.
Next up.
And the note that a few people have actually mentioned that there is support in terms of the chat, Trudy, for access to the appropriate fire prevention work.
Can I bring in Sarah Dickey, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Elaine, for your comprehensive report. It was just by way of sharing in my role as Chair of the Enhanced Professional Clinical and Care Strategic Oversight for Care Homes Group, of which the co-chair is Jackie Pepper, Chief Social Work Officer in Perth and Kinross. The purpose of this group is that the membership, which includes Scottish Care and the Care Inspectorate membership, is that we'll be responsible and accountable for the provision of clinical and professional oversight which would include any elements where there was concern that there was an inability to provide safe and effective care to residents and or the staff that care for those residents. So in terms of the connections with care homes, just to give additional assurances that the oversight membership are very much cited on those elements where care has been raised as a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Next up is Donald. I think this is the final question.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Elaine. You know, as always, it's an interesting and an instructive report, so I'm grateful for that. I've got maybe three. It's a mixture of questions and points. I mean, I'm conscious this is a report to the period ending March 2021, and we're now in February 22. And so I was just wondering, firstly, is that the frequency or the time lapse that we would normally expect, or has it been, particular circumstances that have led to that time gap? So that's my first one, because, clearly it does take time to produce the report, understand that, but if there are issues that need to be addressed, then, clearly it's good to get notice of them as soon as possible. Just a piece of feedback on drafting, and it's a comment that I make probably in just about every report that comes in front of us. At the start, we tend to launch in very quickly into our governance and our processes. I would much rather that we brought up front in these reports, this is what we said we'd do, this is what we did, and these are the outcomes. And, it's in there, but you have to kind of pick your way through it, whereas I think that's what should really matter to the people that we support. So that's a piece of feedback that hopefully, as I say, you're not alone in me making that point. The third one was really around the data, and there's a lot of interesting analysis around the data there. The bit that I was pondering over was on page 13 and 14 of the report, where firstly there's this point about ASP reports are much higher in Dundee than in other places, and then I see the vast majority come from police reports, and of course Police Scotland's a national agency, so I was wondering, why is there that variation? I think so. 2 points around that really. I mean, the first one, where the police become involved in a situation, it's someone's at crisis point, and I just wonder whether there are other agencies that should be picking up someone in need of support earlier down the path. And also linked to that, I just wonder, since, as you say, most of the police reports don't actually meet the 3-point test, I'm wondering whether there's a piece of work to be done around engagement and education with the police in Dundee. So that's a bit of a mixture of things, but hopefully you can pick out the main points.
Okay, thank you. They're helpful questions. I think, first of all, the time lapse, we do try and get these reports as quickly as we can through the structure. So it is to March 2021, and then we start preparing the reports. Then it has to go through appropriate channels. I agree with you. The sooner that we can get it to yourself and to council, the better. So I'm sure we can have a look and see if we could streamline that a little bit. But it does take us time. But I appreciate the comment on that. So we'll have a look at that. The second one about the format of the report, I agree with you. Perhaps we should pull things further forward, the kind of salient points. Having said that, there is now new guidance that's been produced by the Scottish Government that we will have to adhere to for our biannual report, and that may drive us down a different route. So I think we'll have a look at how best to do that, but we are constrained sometimes by the way that the Scottish Government wishes to produce the information, because they then try and collate that nationally and have a look at it across the piece. So we'll have to look at what that looks like, because we haven't implemented that just yet. We've only just got it this last year. The last one, just about data. Yeah, we do have higher adult support and protection referrals in Dundee, and most are from the police. This is because of the way I think we deal with them, and we are looking at this over this next period of time. So the police will make what they call welfare referrals. They will refer through to teams any concerns that they have about individuals. And in some areas, they then say that's a welfare concern and don't then deal with it and report it as an adult support and protection referral. In our area, we actually put all of them, and that's why our figures are higher. But I'm confident that when we actually deal with them, we probably are in a similar position to others. But I do agree that in terms of that data, we need that's an area of work we're looking at to try to make sure that we are in line with other areas in Scotland. So I think it's more a data issue than a particular issue of more referrals from the police, etc. But Diane, you may wish to come in because your teams deal with this, don't you, on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, thank you, Donald. So we have in the city a first contact team. All first points of contact come in. They then to come in from the police as vulnerable person reports, which are then screened and recorded. But because of the nature in which they're delivered, they're recorded in that way. When you look at the data in terms of those who go forward to adult protection processes, our numbers are not any different from other areas or within an expected tolerance level for a city such as Dundee. And then they're dealt with. The area that we look at is whether or not it is a welfare concern or whether it doesn't fit that aspect as well. Where it's a welfare concern, if it's first point of contact, our team will go out and do that assessment. If the person's already known to us through another area, then that information will be forwarded on. So we are looking at that. A lot of work being done with Police Scotland to see if we can kind of minimise the way that the reports are coming in and the means in which they're coming in, because they're coming in as vulnerable person reports. So we've got to manage them as vulnerable people in terms of that route, managing to look at and currently looking at the ways that we actually screen the information coming to us to make sure we can make that as slick as possible. But it is, Elaine, is referred to as a data source, but it's also a practice issue in terms of the way the police present information to us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Elaine and Diane. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, and thanks for your presentation, Elaine. Will you be staying with us for item 9?
Yes, I will. Yeah, so we shall see you shortly.
I think I might reverse the agenda here, actually, to take item 9 immediately after item 7, given that you're going to be speaking to both, if that's all right with everyone else. It seems to make more sense to me. And then, Elaine, you're free to choose whether or not you want to leave at that point, because I will we'll have a short break after item 9, or item 8 as it now is. So is that okay with everyone if we just move to item 9 now? Yep. Thank you.
Happy to deal with that, but I'm also around for item 10 as well, so just to let you know.
Oh, okay, so of course you are, yeah. Right, I'm getting flustered now. I think maybe we'll just stick to the agenda then and have the break after item 8,
okay.
Which I think Martin Day, or sorry, we have Alan Small in the meeting actually, the independent chair. Alan, would you like to make some comments on item 8, arrangements for managing high-risk offenders? And welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, and good morning to everybody. This is, I'm presenting my first Teesside Mapasog annual report to the IJB today. I took over from Elaine Torrance, who was interim chair, up until September 2020, and this report covers a period of the 1st of April 2020 to 31st of March 2021, and that period, as we've heard already, is indelibly stuck in our minds, given that was really the start of the pandemic. I think it's worthy of noting how the services across Teesside, including Dundee, very quickly adapted to the new arrangements we had to work under. MS Teams wasn't available to everybody at that time, and we weren't as accustomed to having meetings as we are now, as this meeting evidences, but it was very quickly made available to those who needed it. And many MAPA meetings took place over a virtual environment, and new ways were found to actually engage with registered sex offenders. Some engagement was done by telephone call, which is never ideal, but that was on a risk assessment basis. And some were done by novel ideas like a walk in the park. And some of that's going to stick. Certainly the outside walks will probably stick from time to time, not as a default, because it's always good to visit people in their own environment and sometimes visit people unexpectedly in their own environment. But I think I've been really impressed how services all came together and how quickly we adapted to new ways of working, and including that the Tayside MAPA SOG, which has been meeting 6 weekly virtually throughout my whole tenure, and we've only just decided to go back to quarterly meetings. There's been a lot achieved by the SOG in that period. We have taken forward some of the things that we said we would do. Not all of them. We still have one outstanding action in regards to a communication strategy, but we have managed to put a number of working groups in place to look at particularly self-evaluation and examine how our practices actually make a difference through audit and through data performance. And we've really managed to expand on the amount of data that we capture. Also put in place a case review working group. As you know, Tayside had 2 significant case reviews, and there are action plans for both, which are generally complete. I think the only action that's outstanding is one that's not within our gift, and that's waiting on the Scottish Government publishing revised MAPA guidance on the 31st of March. But that's only one part of it, because although actions are complete, we need that reassurance that they're actually making a difference. So it's actually that group looking at them and see, well, 1, to get the guarantee that they've been embedded, and 2, to understanding what impact they've had. And what's happened through time is that responsibility has moved to a self-evaluation and training group, and will become almost business as usual. And it kind of answers the so what questions when we deal with these things. Hands up, there's not been an awful lot of training delivered during the period, but we do have an agenda for that now, and we are starting to pick up on that. I think virtual training is really useful. It's probably not the most ideal way to deal with MAPA training, but it will certainly be a blended approach moving forward. Coming back to data and analysis, it's really interesting that Tayside was a bit of an outlier in Scotland, and the number of registered sex offenders fell. At one point it was down by 50 RSOs. I think in the report there it shows that it's probably down by 20 plus. And that didn't really happen anywhere else in Scotland. The only other area that had a drop was down about 17. And using our new data reporting and performance reporting format, we're able to actually see that peculiarly that drop only applies to Dundee City and Angus, and hasn't actually happened in Perth and Kinross, which is a bit of a dilemma to us, and we're continually trying to work our way through. We do know that the slowing of the court system has had a major impact on the number of registered sex offenders who are coming through the system, and to adapt to that, we're now managing that risk at point of conviction and not at point of sentence, because some are convicted and then because of the court delays it's a long time until they're sentenced. But we are aware there's a significant backlog with the courts, so we think that might be part of the problem. Why that would only impact Dundee and Angus, I have absolutely no idea, and we continue to grapple with that. We have noticed, however, the numbers are going back to normal levels, and that probably is as the courts start to open up, and the courts are really starting to open up now, so we expect to see a bit of a throughput. And that again gives us a bit of an issue, because if we suddenly get a wave of registered sex offenders coming through the court system, then services will have to deal with that. So we're keeping a really watchful eye on that, and I'm pleased to see at this moment in time it's still coming as a bit of a steady flow and isn't giving us any concern. One other thing I want to mention about the report, quite unusually, we've actually managed to gather the views of registered sex offenders as to how they think the MAPA process has worked for them. And I think that's really important, because by keeping registered sex offenders safe, we keep the public safe, and MAPA is extremely effective. So I think that's to be commended, and that approach is to be commended. And I chair another MAPA SOG in Scotland, and I'm stealing that from the work that's happened in Tayside, because I think that's an extremely positive way forward. So I think that basically covers the report, you have the report there in front of you, and you've got the covering report as well. And I'm happy to take any questions.
You're on mute, Ken.
Sorry. I said, yeah, thanks for that presentation. Very, very interesting, particularly the challenges that you faced during the pandemic and the novel methods that you've used to continue the work. I'm just interested in 4.4.1. Clearly, you've had a lot of people working remotely, but 4.4.1 in the report seems to indicate that you need to be in the building to access the Visor database. Is that just deemed too confidential to be used remotely in your own home, for example? I think
exactly
said there. So
it's exactly that. Yeah, it's. I mean, there are many issues around about Visor. It's not the most user-friendly system in the world, but that's one that has actually raised its head during the pandemic. However, there have been staff Visor trained with Visor access working as and when they need to throughout the pandemic. So the MAPA coordinator, Lane Osborne, who is a Visor user, has primarily been working from within their office to kind of resolve that. Yeah, you can't use it at home. It's because of classification.
Yep, thanks for that. So I'll bring in Bailey Wright, followed by Trudy.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener Alan. Thanks for all that information. I know you've probably skimmed on some of the stuff that the questions asked at the other committee, but I'm just going to reiterate them anyway, and you might want to say a bit more. Obviously, section 4.5.2 refers to significant case reviews for Person X and Prisoner Z, and you have said that progress has been made in completing some of the improvement actions, but from these reports, how do we know that these are having the intended impact that you're expecting? Section 4.6, the report notes that the reduction in convicted RSOs is likely to be associated with the impact on court business. Obviously, it's a pandemic that slowed everything down. You have touched on the courts, just wondering how soon we can expect these issues to be resolved, and how will services continue to be managed, during this time. And also the MAPA guidance is currently being revised, and you did touch on that as well. But I have concerns about local partners and how they might be able to change, how they might be able to react to the change in guidance if anything's been done beforehand, any training or talk that has been had with particularly the third sector in some of that guidance. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'll work my way through that, and then I'm going to pass over to Glenn Lloyd, who I see is on the call, to cover some of that. So the thing about the significant case review actions, they are all complete bar one that awaits the MAPA guidance, and that guidance in particular has been refreshed to look at section 15 within it. It's to look at how the Scottish Prison Service deal with prisoners who are eligible for home release. So until we actually see that in black and white, we really can't satisfy that. How do we know it makes a difference? Well, it's very difficult. It's a really difficult question to answer, but through audit and assurance. So the Tayside SOG has various structures in place to ensure that single agencies such as Scottish Prison Service, such as Police Scotland, such as Community Justice, actually bring back evidence of how those changes are being implemented and that they are continuing to be implemented. And that gives the SOG assurance that those changes are actually making an impact. On the court delays, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, and Glenn's far more cited on this than me, but I've heard 2 years being the timescale that's mentioned until we get back to some form of normality. And we will monitor the throughput from the court service. And if it does cause an issue, then I know Glenn is going to tell you now, I suspect, about additional resources that have been made available. So, Glenn, I'm going to be quiet now and hand over to you, and then I'll come back to talk about the guidance, if that's okay.
Yeah. Would you like to come in at this point, Glenn?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Bailey Wright, for the question. And yes, the pandemic has impacted court business. Obviously, the courts had to comply with the public health requirements, so there have been fewer people able to appear in court. But police bail conditions have still applied. So where somebody's been arrested for a sexual offence, they've still had the opportunity, the possibility to be asked to comply with police bail conditions. The court has prioritised high risk of harm offenders in terms of those that do appear in court. And again, court bail conditions also apply. We know as well that above and beyond that, the court has remanded a higher number of offenders, and a higher proportion of those have been registered sex offenders during the pandemic. So although the pandemic's impacted on the flow of court business, in general terms, that hasn't increased risk in terms of our capacity to manage people through different parts of the system. Going forwards, the court is now starting to recover. Business is starting to increase again. Gradually, we're seeing increases in court reports, increases in community payback orders, increases in prison sentences again. But levels are still below the pre-pandemic period, and the Community Justice Service has been given additional Scottish Government funding to cope with any increase in demand. And we're anticipating a particular increase in demand from the 1st of March, when we believe the court will open up another courtroom to accommodate more cases going through. So broadly speaking, we've managed the system, and going forwards, we're confident at this stage at least that we've got the capacity to manage any increases, although as Alan said, we will need to carefully monitor that.
Okay, thank you. Trudy, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, I've still to address the guidance question.
Okay, apologies, carry on.
If you would.
Yeah, you were coming back in, yeah, sorry.
So we have had sight of draft revised MAPA guidance. That was sent out about a year ago to all SOGs, all of the 10 SOGs in Scotland. And we were asked to give comment, and significant comment has been fed back to the Scottish Government. So we have an idea of what is in the guidance, and there's nothing really that causes us any alarm. However, we've yet to see the final version, and there is a potential there could be things in there that have been added at the last minute, or have been added since the draft has been consulted on. However, it won't be a case of new guidance on the 31st of March and going live on the 1st of April. There will be a period of grace where SOGs will have to put their processes and procedures in place to match the new guidance. So I don't anticipate any problem in that whatsoever. We are, as I said before, anxious to see the section in relation to the Scottish Prison Service involvement, and I believe that has been significantly redrafted since the draft was issued, but I haven't seen the final version. So I think it's a case of we'll just have to wait and see, but I don't have any great concerns about that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does, Alan, actually. And in fact, thank you for extending. You've added more today than we had at the last meeting, and I found that very useful. So thanks very much for that, and thank you, Glenn.
Yep. Trudy, please.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. You've given such a detailed report. You've blown my questions out of the water, but I will continue to make comment. And I would absolutely endorse your view about the can-do attitude that you spoke about in your paper. And I reflect that goes throughout all of the staff teams throughout Dundee, but particularly in MAPA. I would say well done. On page 69, I think it's really impressive that that Castle Huntly have managed to be the only private prison in Scotland to remain COVID-free. That's really commendable, and their working practice must be really excellent. Page 70, I was very pleased to note that NHS Tayside in developing a public protection framework in partnership which prioritised the public protection agenda, including the appointment of a MAPA health liaison officer. which really ensures that all aspects of the service is managed as business as usual during the pandemic. And congratulations on that. This has been a very interesting and reassuring paper.
Thank you for that. Yes, you're right to highlight the NHS Tayside approach, because I think that's fairly unique across Scotland, and it's one that I really welcome.
Yep, Donald, you're the final.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alan. I mean, I agree with what Trudy's just said about, you know, the assurance that this paper gives us. It's, you know, interesting and, you know, clearly a lot of thought and attention given to this area. The part that I particularly wanted to highlight was the section in your report around offender participation and that survey. I mean, I think it's really important to do that, and you know, so I was pleased to see that, and I was pleased to see some of the messages coming back that maybe give you some assurance. My only question, when I was reading in pages 2 and 3 of the report, and you set out what each of the councils did particularly during the pandemic, and I wasn't sure if I was seeing a difference between Dundee on the one hand and Perth and Kinross and Angus on the other in terms of emphasis. I mean, in the Perth and Kinross and the Angus sections, there seemed to be you know, a bit of emphasis on the welfare of offenders. It spoke about food parcels and well-being packages, where the emphasis in the Dundee section, it seemed to talk more about supervision and control. And clearly you need that, but I think you also need to take account of the welfare. And I'm just wondering, am I detecting an actual difference in approach, or is it just the way the sections have been written?
I'm fairly confident it's the way the sections have been written. And perhaps there was another story to tell about Dundee. As opposed to that, I'm going to hand over again to Glenn, or in fact, Martin Day has now joined us, and he's got his hand up, who will be able to give you some reassurance on that, I'm sure.
Martin?
No, it's a very good point. I would definitely say that the holistic approach was taken in Dundee. It is about monitoring and management of high-risk offenders, but it is about offering support. In fact, some of the comments that came back in the client survey that you were just talking about when I managed to join the meeting, one of them very explicitly said, "You have helped me with my employment, you've helped me with my housing, you've helped me with," if I'm going to say, it actually says getting back to Ibrox again, it said in the quote, but I had to take that as whatever that means. Yes, undoubtedly we do look to support people because pro-social lives are part of reducing their offending. We did have a survey. This is another half of the coin. The independent MAPA coordinator did a survey of usage of what's called Visor, the national computer system, and it did actually highlight that Dundee were in more face-to-face contact than Perth and Angus. We didn't give a figure for that in our committee report, because that would then be a committee report about Perth and Angus as well, which is not appropriate for a Dundee committee report. But actually, the Dundee workers were prioritising face-to-face contact more often than Perth and Angus, is what the neutral MAPA coordinator revealed in their figures.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that does give me assurance on that point.
I see no further hands, so thank you, Alan, for speaking to the paper, which is for noting. As I said, I think at this point we can take a short break. It's 11:39 just now. Can we come back and say 11:45, please? That's 11:45. I don't know if everyone is back yet. I'll just assume that they are, and we can resume the meeting.
Yeah, thanks very much, Stuart. Prior to the break, we had agreed items 7 and 8.
Yep.
That takes you on to item 9 now, Dundee Child Protection Committee Annual Report, which is for noting.
Yeah, just like the other night at the council meeting, Elaine, you're very much in demand at this meeting too. So I'd be grateful if you could speak to this paper, please.
Certainly will. Thank you again for opportunity to speak to this report, which you need to note covers August 2020 to July 2021. So timescales aren't exactly the same as for the Adult Support and Protection report that we've just looked at, and that's because they've been aligned with the school year. Just to note that as well. People will know that child protection committees have the overall strategic responsibility for continuous improvement of child protection policy and practice. And this report covers the areas of improvement over the year, as well as some of the work that we've been doing. So some of the areas that we have been working on have been managing strategic risks, been a lot of work put into that, particularly through the pandemic period. This coincides as well with the joint inspection process, and this report kind of dovetails with the next report that we're going to look at, which is feedback from the joint inspection, because it covers the same period. We've been focusing on data, analysing data and assurance processes. For example, we've received reports on the operation of the multi-agency screening hub, which has been really helpful. But we think we should be joining the dots a bit more in terms of that as we move forward. We've established a case review subgroup, and that's now looking at the learning activity and the findings of the case reviews. And as Alan was saying, a similar approach to making sure that those actions are actually implemented. But the so what question, has it made a difference to children and young people in terms of their lives? So getting that feedback as well important. And we have an engagement group as well, which is planning and taking forward improvements in the way that children and young people can work with the committee. And that's also been established this last year. There's a section again on the response to the pandemic. The committee met more regularly to oversee partnership working, identify any risks, make sure mitigating actions were in place. And in my role as independent chair, I would just like to make a few comments on the effective partnership working that happened during that period. Everybody pulled together, agencies were very flexible. So for example, there was a real focus on trying to keep in touch with young people and children, particularly when schools were closed. And if social workers weren't able to manage to get their health visitors were going in, so there was very, very clear operational work on the ground, but also at committee there was very, very good partnership working. I think that comes through. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the staff as well, and similarly in the adult support and protection world, staff have to be commended for their dedication, flexibility and commitment. They were going into houses, they were making sure they had appropriate PPE, but they were making sure that appropriate support was in place. And again, that was right across all the agencies who were stepping up and doing a great job during this period. And I think that comes through through the report. There's a number of strengths that we've been identified in terms of this period, particularly following the inspection, but we also identify we've got areas for further improvement that we need to be making, and they're identified in the annual report. I've got a bit more work to flesh these out and get the final arrangements for this in terms of a development plan. Because we need to prioritise what we're going to do. We need to be able to manage to do this effectively. But we know that we've got issues about improving responses to older young people at risk of harm. I would like to see more joined up quality assurance processes and getting better outcome data and feedback from children and young people themselves and their families. There's some work starting, which I think will be progressing, which is working much more closely with other committees, the drug and alcohol services, violence against women, and you can see mental health coming through as a clear theme in terms of this work as well. So I think the report kind of highlights a range of areas that we have tackled this last year, but also the areas that we'd like to be working on and moving forward. So in terms of introduction, that's probably enough, and I'm happy to answer any questions along with the other officers that are on the call today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elaine. There's two hands up. Bailey Wright first, please.
And thanks, Elaine, for this report and for all the good work that you and the committee do. And certainly to all the staff, they have to be congratulated in this area for working the way that they do, because at 4.5.2, it says Dundee has been able to sustain high levels of contact with children and young people during the pandemic. How has this been possible? Has there been any feedback from the families that have used the service, and in particular the staff, about the impact that this has had on them? Just touching on the timescales for the delivery plan, I was just wondering if it's about to be finalised, or what the timescales are. And of course, if we look at page 17, domestic abuse is the most common concern for children on the Child Protection Register, and levels are much higher than the Scottish average, which I was actually quite surprised to see. And I'm just curious, why are our levels so much higher, and what are we doing to address this here in Dundee? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for those questions, Councillor Binley Wright. Yeah, I can tackle some of these with support from the officers. So, yeah, the issue about sustaining high levels of contact with children and young people through the pandemic. There was a lot of excellent work that went on to make sure that we were in touch with children and young people that may be vulnerable and needing support, and their families. One of the things that I found really, really helpful was the introduction of a hidden harm group, where all the agencies came together, identified any children that they were quite concerned about, and actually implemented a plan of action to make sure that they were supported. And I think we have to say that our schools were absolutely involved, and nurseries were involved in this. They did a really good job even when schools were closed. If they had the education hubs, obviously the school hubs, but also they would go to houses and make sure that they were knocking on doors if they weren't seeing people. So I think in terms of that response, it was really, really positive. But Glyn might be able to say a little bit more about some of the practicalities of that, if you would like, Glyn.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Bailey Wright, again for the question. And the only thing I would add is that at the very start of the pandemic, we introduced a framework which encouraged the teams to see people on a face-to-face or a digital basis, or both, depending on their assessed level of risk and need. So if you were higher risk, you were seen more often on a face-to-face. If you were lower risk, you were seen less often. Very often, families were seen on a daily basis, involving a mixture of both face-to-face and digital. But obviously, some of the families we support were less high risk, less in need, and seen on that basis much less often. But that framework also informed who we referred to the 8 community support centres run by our school colleagues across the city. It informed who we supported in relation to summer play activities as well. It informed, to a degree, the work of the new partnership Hidden Harm Group, which Elaine has alluded to, because in that meeting, people were able to say, well, OK, we're doing this for X, Y, and Z family, but who might we be missing? Who's not attending school? Who's not currently supported by social work? Who's supported by someone else? Do they know them? Do they know what's happening? Do we need to be more assertive in terms of proactive outreach and home visits and such like? So the framework helped. It was a starting point, but it was only a starting point. And from there, we needed to have the partnership conversations about how we adapt and improve and continue to support families at each of the different stages of the pandemic over the last 2 years. And in terms of the impact on staff, it's been really difficult, hasn't it? It's been hugely challenging for everyone. But they welcomed the framework. Morale has been boosted by the findings of the inspection. It's validated, if you like, that approach. And going forwards now, we're looking forward to coming out of it. Obviously, we're at the best stage of the pandemic that we've been in the last 2 years. We're not completely out of it, but we're looking forward now to moving on and actually retaining some of those elements that we adopted during the pandemic, some of which I've just described, but there are more elements as well that we intend to retain going forwards.
Can I say thanks for that, Glenn? You must be so proud of the workers that are working, you know, on the frontline services. I think they have all gone beyond the call of duty, and they do it because they're caring people, and they know that it makes such a difference. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, shall I pick up the other 2 points briefly that you raised? The one was about the delivery plan. We have a development session now in the diary because we're looking at all the improvement areas, including the inspection improvements, and we want to prioritise what we can do this year and into next year. So that plan will be finalised and is going to the Chief Officers Group in April 2022. So there is a timescale for that to be completed. And just the last question you asked about domestic abuse, we know we have a higher population prevalence of domestic abuse in the city. But there is, again, a lot of joint work that's now going on with the Violence Against Women Partnership and the Child Protection Partnership. And we have processes such as MARAC. And I don't know whether, Catherine, you want to come in and talk a little bit about some of the domestic abuse work, just to reassure the committee.
Yep. So obviously Dundee has a really high population prevalence of domestic abuse, so it wouldn't be unexpected to see a bigger proportion of children in the Child Protection Register. In fact, I think that offers us some reassurance that we are effectively identifying that. As Elaine says, there's a large range of multi-agency processes and developments around domestic abuse. So MARAC processes for our highest risk victims and some of our health and social care services, including the Dundee Drugs and Alcohol Recovery Service, are very much linked into that. And there's also been a wide range of investment in new services recently, and focuses on things like Safe and Together, CEDAR, which is a group work recovery programme for children and parents affected by domestic abuse. Children and families are working on capacity building in terms of their expertise to respond. And we've also got linked developments in community justice around Caledonian programme and accountability of perpetrators as well. So there's been a lot of investment around domestic abuse over the last couple of years. Some of the remobilisation monies from the Health and Social Care Partnership have supported additional capacity and services to reduce waiting lists, which the IJB heard about at the last meeting as well. So a lot of progress, and I'm obviously happy to provide more detail to people off table if that's helpful.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yes, thanks for that, Catherine. It'd be useful to see that. Thank you.
Next up is Trudy.
Hi, again, Elaine. Thank you very much for that. And Glenn, I was very pleased to hear you saying that you're going to take the learning from your work during the COVID pandemic through to your future work and your development work. That's really encouraging. I have to say that I'm very reassured. I'm astounded by the work that goes on, but not absolutely surprised, because I know that the staff, including the education staff, the nursery staff, everybody, they've always stepped up to the plate in Dundee. And throughout my time in the IJB, I've always been very proud of the staff in the Health and Social Care Partnership. I'm going to go to page 14 of your report. And I'm just noting that 19% of children on the CP register were unborn babies, where the average is 4%, the Scottish average. In Dundee, this rose to 30% in the following 12 months from 2020. Is this because of the effects of the pandemic socially, or does this figure tie into the links in Dundee with poverty and drug and alcohol use, which also features, as Helen had said, as one of our key areas of concern?
Yeah, that's a very important area. I think it does the figures look quite different to other areas, as you've just pointed out. I think some of this is to do with the unborn baby protocol that we have, and that works really, really effectively. And when we look at the inspection report, you'll see that there's quite a lot of positive commentary about preventative work and us getting involved much earlier. And I think the two elements of this really combine together to sort of indicate the figures are higher, but we're perhaps getting involved much earlier and making sure we get the right support at an earlier stage. So I think that's probably the reasons why, but Glenn, you may wish to elaborate on that a little bit. You're closer to it.
Thank you, Elaine. Only really to say that we think it's partly due to the demographics, and partly we think because, as Elaine says, due to the range of services we have in place in relation to prevention and targeted support. So there's all the work that goes across NHS Tayside in particular in relation to prevention, and then the targeted support. There's a range of initiatives from Pause through to New Beginnings through to the Family Nurse Partnership and such like. And obviously relates, I think, as well to another point made by the inspection team, which is that in Dundee, we think we're good at identifying risks, we're good at assessments, we're good at responding to those risks. And I think you put all that together, what you end up with is a higher proportion of unborn babies or mothers with very young children who are receiving support from social work teams.
Thank you very much for that. That's reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Short.
Thank you, Chair. Because of the pandemic, I think we all went into sort of different worlds. And the way that the city came together with things like the Food Insecurity Network, and Eric will hopefully back me up on this one, there was lots of innovation where the third sector actually supported incredible things that may never have happened before. One of the suggestions was to put violence against women information into sanitary protection drops so that when they were going through the doors, that information was there. So, you know, we sometimes get concerned when there's high instances of domestic abuse. However, does it mean actually that people have enough confidence to actually say that it's happening so they can break the chain? And I think, again, Glenn, you'll not be surprised to hear my favourite topic. The Fort system has just been such an incredible opportunity, and I'm still to this day introducing people to Bernardo's and Action for Children so that they can get the full rundown on what you can do with Fort. And I mean, the £185,000 that came in from the Scottish Government through Fort, which was able to go into electricity, and it opened to me conversations with people that I then was able to say to Glenn, I think perhaps we need to look a little bit closer here. So that third sector support was just huge to kind of allay a lot of the fears that I had that it was going to the professionals. So I can't underestimate just how good the partnership was at that point. And, you know, going forwards, just to kind of hold on to that we have across all of the literature, if not you, who, and that really is the case. They are all our parents, so we do need to be super vigilant. And you know, it's great to know that it does go to the strategic level, but actually it's very much happening across all the different sort of parts of the city, which is huge. So I can only thank you for that and allowing me to be part of that, really, basically. Thank you.
Eric Knox.
Yeah, and I was going to just mention the third sector in this, but as usual, I don't have to in these meetings because everybody raises it as well. And that was one of the things that came strongly out of the child protection report, was the third sector and the influence the third sector has in Dundee and how it's critical services that the third sector provide. And I think the relationship right across all partners in Dundee, third sector, statutory, is really, really good, and it's really heartening to see that coming out in the inspection as well going forward. And I think, to build on what Councillor Short was talking about, the Food Insecurity Network, that's really developed as a result of COVID, and it's developed in a really positive way. And what they're doing is they're dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in Dundee. So how we can use that network more to build on getting services and support out to individuals will be interesting to see how that develops. I know it's developed a lot. It can develop more to help that process. So it's just a recognition of all services working together from me, and that is the way we've been doing it is pretty unique, I think, in a lot of ways. So it's a real positive.
Yeah, it's certainly been a real team effort, which is much appreciated, including the third sector, as you both said. I see no further hands, and this item is for noting. So I would say thank you and goodbye, Elaine, but we're moving swiftly on to the next item, which you'll be here for as well, Willie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Item 10 then before is the joint inspection of services for children at risk of harm in the city, findings and improvement plans. It's for noting.
Yeah, just before I ask you to speak, Elaine, you know, the one part of the report that stands out for me is at 4.5.2, talking about the pandemic. The partnership acted swiftly at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic to prioritise children and young people at risk of harm. We saw no difference in responses to concerns prior to or as the pandemic progressed, despite the significant restrictions placed on public services. Children and young people were just as safe, had just as many contacts, and staff made the same efforts to ensure children and young people's needs were prioritised. That's really laudable and really reassuring, and I think sets the tone for this paper. If you wouldn't mind saying a few words on the paper, Elaine, before we move on to questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I think there are similarities between these two reports, so I didn't want to say too much about the detail of the inspection report, but I was delighted with this report, and I think there's a lot of very, very positive messages for staff and reassurance for yourselves in terms of this report. There's clearly work to do, but I think we were pretty much aware of most of that, and that's helpful when you're self-aware and your self-evaluation processes work well. But there was only one quality indicator that was evaluated by the inspection team, and that was about the impact on children and young people. And I think when you look at that's about children feeling valued, loved, fulfilled, secure, feel listened to, understood, respected, and get a good start in life, the best start in life. And that's evaluated as good, which is that, you know, strengths, important strengths, with some areas for improvement. I think that's got to be commended, especially during that pandemic period that's just been referred to. There's some really strong commentary here about some of the areas that we're really working well. You can see here that they're kind of reflecting on the partnership responses being very positive, and I was particularly impressed by the commentary about the ability of frontline practitioners to build and sustain positive relationships with children and young people. And that came back from meetings with children and young people themselves. The inspectors did most of this virtually, but they did meet face to face with children, young people, and their families if they agreed to do so. So I think that's all very, very positive. There are areas for improvement that are identified here. As I said before, most of these we were aware of beforehand. So we knew that there's work to do around that older young people group, the 16 to 18-year-old group. We'd identified some of that through some case reviews that we'd had already. That linkage where people have got complex needs around substance misuse, mental health, and how we deal with that and how effectively we do that. So I think there are areas for improvement identified in this report that will go into our development of stroke improvement plan, and we will be making sure that these are addressed through an action plan. You can see the improvement plan as we've got as it stands at the minute. To detail with some of this work, there's a lot of work going on around all of these areas. The other area for improvement, which again we knew already, was about actually how we hear the voice of young people and children and families, and how that gets into how we hear that strategically, as well as taking, you know, recognising we need to perhaps get better at that, and that's where our engagement group that I mentioned earlier is coming into force. But overall, really, you know, I really feel that we made a lot of progress since the last inspection. And this report has a lot of positives that we can take assurance from. Really make sure we get messages to staff out of this report, and hopefully provide you at the IJB assurance too. It's an independent look at our work. So happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll take Diane McCulloch next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a statement as Chief Social Work Officer. Obviously, as Head of Service, I attend the meeting, but I sit on the meeting as Chief Social Work Officer as a member. I really commend this report and the inspection report and the findings of it. It has to be said that Dundee was the first out of all the areas to have this inspection, so we'd nobody else to look to see what might the inspectors be. So we went in really quite blind in terms of the inspection. It's really a credit to Glyn, his team, and Catherine and her team, who did a lot of work in terms of pulling information together to actually get us to a position where we were able to demonstrate just the effectiveness and the good practice which went across all of children's services as part of this. I'm very aware from sitting on other areas that lots of people are really interested in speaking to Glyn and Catherine about how they did the work for the inspection, and certainly when the report was published, a lot of people reached out to say they were very impressed with the findings. So like Elaine and no doubt others, I think really the team need to be commended for the really good work that they've done over the pandemic, and expecting that to go forward. And just one other comment, one of the areas where we want to focus on going forward is around young adults, those who are transitioning between children's services, excuse me, and adult services. And I would say that over this last year, along with other areas of improvement, I think the relationship around young adults between adult services and children's services has significantly improved, and we're doing a lot of joint work when it comes to both reviewing protection matters but also progressing protection matters. So I would add my thanks to everybody for such an impressive report.
Absolutely. Bailey Wright.
Thank you, convener. Obviously, this question's been asked before, but I think it's good to welcome the report. I think the inspection report clearly reflects very positively on the hard work and the dedication of the staff. And part of the question is what's been done to acknowledge this, to make sure that the staff are aware of the findings, and to thank them for their hard work. And I know you've touched on that, Elaine, because I think sometimes the staff get their head down, they get the work done, and sometimes they're the feeling that nobody has said sort of thank you for that. So it's good if that's been done. And I think it was really good to see that there was a very close alignment between our position statement and the inspections team's findings. And of course, there is a however. I did note that whilst we said that engagement with children and young people was key, the achievement the inspection report identified this as an area that required further improvement. So are you assured that the CPC has a good overview of the current practices in the area, and that the improvement plan addresses all the points that have been raised within the inspection report? I think the improvement plan that the CPC has developed looks very comprehensive, and it's good to see what work was already in process, along with new actions that have been identified. And I'm going to ask you a question I asked you the other night. Do you feel as the independent chair that the right resources and the commitment are in place across the agencies to be able to deliver this plan? Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, thanks. And thank you very much for those questions. So the first one was about what we were doing to let staff know, how grateful we were for their work, etc. So, yeah, there's already been a multi-agency workforce briefing that's been issued, and also a message of thanks for chief officers has been developed and circulated. So there's been some early information out already to staff. And more broadly, the Chief Officers Group, all of the committees sort of report up to the Chief Officers Group with Chief Executives involved in that. And a video has been developed to support a discussion at team meetings. So we're just trying to finalise all of that and get that out to staff as well. That's a different form of communication. So rather than just an email in your box, trying to get something that's visually connecting to staff. And more broadly, the Chief Officers Group recently has just got a subgroup to focus on staff recognition and acknowledgement, not just in terms of the inspection, but much more broadly. And there's work going on to identify a range of options for that, so we can think about visibility and communication with frontline staff. So I think a lot of good work going on to address that point. So hopefully that gives you assurance to that question. The question about the close alignment between our position statement, yeah, we were very pleased that most of what we had highlighted was endorsed by the inspection team. But yeah, I think in terms of our work with children and young people and engagement, I think the point that was being raised was that was mainly at single agency level. So we were a lot of work that was developing, certainly in schools that have been highlighted, and with looked after children, a lot of work being developed in terms of that. But I think there was learning that we could do multi-agency and take that forward across the piece. I don't know if anybody wants to say any more about that, because they're a bit closer to the work that's currently underway. And finally, just the plan. The reason we've taken a bit of a stand back just in terms of the development plan is to make sure that we do have the right priorities in place and the resources to deliver that. There's no point in setting ourselves up to have so many improvement areas, because the recommendations from the inspection aren't the only things we would really like to focus on. So we've got a development session that's set up from the CPC, and that will actually look at these. But clearly, the inspection priorities we will have to be considering. So I feel we. Good multi-agency working, if all the agencies can work together and we can pool our resources, I feel confident we can make progress in this area. But if at any point in the future we need extra capacity, I will be raising that at the CPC and at the Chief Officers Group to make sure that Chief Officers are aware of that. So hopefully that's a quick canter through your questions. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Elaine, for that. You know, I thought it's a great idea, whoever had it, to produce a video for the staff to watch, because I think that's a bit of paper goes in the fire, but you can keep your video on your PC forever and go on to it whenever you're feeling a bit low to say that you really are appreciated. So thank you for that.
Yep, Trudy McClay.
Yeah, I would absolutely endorse what Helen's just said about the video. What a great way to thank staff. I wanted to say that in the last 4 papers, you focus on stakeholder feedback. That is such an important piece, and it's such an important way of improving through feedback. So well done on that, and I'm pleased to hear that you're continuing with that stakeholder engagement. I'm also very pleased to note that the staff are completely aware of the key risks and that they've worked hard to address these. That's within the report. And overall, this inspection really reflects very well on the efforts of staff and the delivery of service. We're very fortunate in Dundee to have such a great team.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Donald?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I agree with what others have said about lots of positives in this report. So well done. I'll be brief in the interests of time. I mean, I was just going to focus in on the 4th improvement area, and that maybe won't surprise you given my earlier comments. It's the needing to have in place arrangements for the joint and systematic review of outcomes data. And it's a point that I do raise regularly at these meetings. It's sometimes quite difficult to see what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and what have we actually achieved? You know, we having a set of key performance indicators, measures of success, whatever you call them, and then rigorously reporting how well, or maybe how not so well, we've done against them and what we're going to do in the future. And when I read the plan, there's a lot of words in there, but I still wasn't clear that what we would get at the end of it would be what I'm looking for. So can I ask you to give more thought to this point around what are the outcomes that you want to see in terms of the people we're there to serve, and how will we measure it? But, you know, I think there's a lot of positives and we've got a lot of good stuff to build on there. It's just how we demonstrate to the people that pay our wages that we're doing what we should be.
Yeah, and just to respond to that, I can assure you this is an area that I think everybody's grappling with across Scotland. So it's not particularly just unique to Dundee, but we have developed the engagement subgroup. We've got young people. We're engaging with them to say how can we get feedback? You know, what's the best way to do that? And already they're saying if you try and sit us down in a room, that's not the right way. But if you take us to McDonald's, we are much more likely to get some positive feedback in a way. So we're already hearing that kind of message. But I think you're right. There's something about if people are attending case conferences or case review meetings, are we asking them, did you feel listened to? You know, that kind of general feedback. So there's micro things I think we can do, as well as the more strategic approaches that we can do. So we are I think the improvement plan's a starter. It doesn't have the detail, but absolutely agree with you. We need to get better at it, and that's really important. If we all think we're doing a good job, but actually young people and children don't think we are, we need to hear that and think about how we can improve. So it will be a key focus for us over the next period of time.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. I mean, you're right. This isn't easy. This is difficult stuff. So I do understand that what I'm asking isn't a quick fix. But I think it's capturing that feedback and then capturing it in a measurable way, and you know, reporting it back and then deciding where you go next. So, you know, I wish you lots of success in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed, as do I, and I also want to thank you for your time today, Elaine. You've been given quite a grilling. Thanks for that.
Thank you for listening.
Grilling, and thanks for your time. That item is also for noting. So can we move on, please, Willie?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Item 11 then, before you, fairer working conditions and home care. This is also for noting.
Yeah, I think this is a really important paper, because without staff who are valued and properly remunerated, we cannot provide the care that our citizens deserve. There are a few things I want to pick up on in the report. Baseline audit. I'm disappointed that one provider didn't respond. I think if we are paying them to deliver a service and we ask simple questions of that service that they're delivering, they should answer it. Maybe we should name and shame, maybe not in this forum. Also really surprised to learn that there are some providers who don't pay travel time and who don't pay downtime. Because, you know, if you use the analogy of the fire brigade, if you don't pay the fire brigade for downtime, then the time when they're not attending fires or performing their other duties, they don't get paid for, but you have to have them there. So I really can't understand how any care provider, private care provider, can justify not paying downtime. A few other things, I won't go on, but I don't know who's wanting to speak to this paper.
I'll speak to this, Chair.
Okay, thanks. If you want to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This is an update paper that we were asked to bring in relation to what we're doing about Fair Work, starting in home care, because that was the area where we had most concerns raised. So it's really just an update that what we've done is started to look and worked with a number of colleagues to develop what we thought principles would be around Fair Work, so as we were clear about what we were actually asking. And then, as outlined in the report, we did an audit of that to see how people were performing. And in response to that, kind of developed an action plan, and that's two-part, because we're obviously coming to the end of one set of contracts and starting to think how we commission this in future. So we'll look to build this much more into the contracts going forward, but also how we're working with providers now to try and encourage and support them to match that. So it's really just a progress update in relation to that, and I can see there are quite a few hands up, so I'm happy to answer any questions in relation to that.
Yeah, with a lot of hands up indeed. Bailey, right, you're first up.
Mine's is quite a quick question. Maybe Jenny, you could let us know, have the unions signed up to this, and what are their views on this? Also, on page 185, looking at the inherent risk level was extreme at one point in time, but the planned risk is 3, which is a lower level. So well done if that is going to work out like that. So thanks, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. I'm maybe not the right person to say whether the unions have signed up to it. I don't think we've got anything formally in place, but what I would say is I met with Raymond and Jim at the outset to discuss what kind of things were coming through their membership, and so it really does take that on board. And in relation to the risk level, I think we were all quite surprised at what we found, but I don't think this is unsolvable, and we've certainly made good steps towards progressing this.
Good. Yeah, can I bring in Jim McFarlane, please?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jenny. Look, you know, I welcome this paper. I don't think there's anything in here that is a surprise to me. Some of the stuff is stuff that we've been shouting from the rooftops about for a number of years, over things like pay for travel time, staff being asked to pay for their own uniforms, the use of 0-hour contracts and stuff like that. I think, you know, it's a good first step from my point of view about how we, you know, influence the commissioning process and hold to account, you know, those organisations who are, you know, first of all, are providing care services to some of the most vulnerable people in the city. And, you know, our motivation for that is to raise that standard. And it's also then, you know, the predicted, how do we meet the demand that we all recognise as a shortage in that workforce? How do we attract particularly young people to go into this type of environment and work and develop a career path and everything else like that? Not to meet the current demand, never mind the predicted future demand for those type of services. And that, for me, the role of trade unions here are very important. And I think, you know, the evidence is very clear on a number of issues. Yes, trade union organised workplaces usually have better pay, better terms and conditions, better health and safety records and all the rest of it. But also, and I think maybe what some of the organisations haven't recognised so far is sometimes there's a benefit to the employer as well. You know, over a whole range of issues. And that's even clearly evidenced by the regular and numerous independent inspection reports, which clearly show that trade union organised workplaces have a better track record and higher levels of care, you know, in general, and stuff like that. So I think that's important. I think it's also the point about, you know, I maybe have quibbles on some of the wording, because even the point about recognition of trade unions where trade unions have members, in my opinion, these organisations should be open to us as trade unions to go into them and to be able to kind of recruit members to sign up to formal negotiation agreements as we do, you know, in the local authority and the NHS and everything else like that, as a real partnership, if you like, about you know, raising standards and stuff like that. So I'm open, because I also know, I recognise that some of these organisations may have misperceptions or negative connotations of trade union and involvement and stuff like that. But I'm certainly open to kind of, you know, continued dialogue and open to even meeting with any of these organisations about how we actually can concretely build on that and come to a kind of, you know, having proper formal negotiation recognition agreements. And for, you know, for myself or any other trade union colleagues to also, you know, try to explain to anybody who's reticent to that, to say, we think there are some benefits to you here as well. And we think, you know, all the stuff about addressing some of those points will, you know, reduce staff turnover, you know, be able to retain people longer and everything else like that. But, you know, most importantly is that it's about improving the level of service. And, you know, in some ways, you know, some of these organisations have got away with it for far too long without being held to account. And I think this is a good start.
Can I quickly come back
Yep.
on that? Because there wasn't really a question in that, but it was just to give some of the detail of the feedback around the union question. We weren't getting a sense of a resistance towards that. I mean, I wouldn't say this is universally true, but some of the feedback was, well, it hasn't really come up, but we're not against this. So I think there's something that we can build on there, Jim, locally, and something that we can discuss and look to take forward.
Yep. Trudy McLeod, please.
Like you, Chair, I'm very surprised that somebody we pay to provide care has not got back in touch with us when we ask a question about the quality of the care or the service provision. I think that's a disgrace. But I was particularly pleased to see this paper and the intention to include the bullet points at 4.2 in the commissioning planning. Fair working conditions are really key in attracting and retaining good staff, particularly in care areas, and we do need good staff. We've spoken on lots of occasions of the fact that the care staff may not always be paid for travel time. I've spoken to some of the care staff, and a lot of them travel by bus. Now, that takes up a significant part of their day, travelling on the bus to get from one client to another client. And I think they should be paid for that time. I feel quite strongly about it. Why should you use your own time to go between clients? The fact that Dundee Health and Social Care Partnership have recognised this and have included payment for staff travel between clients as an area of good practice is very welcome indeed and is absolutely commendable.
Thank you. Donald, please. Donald McPherson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I was one of the people who was asking for this report, and I'm really grateful to Jenny and the team for having done the work on it. Frankly, I found it quite eye-opening. You know, not just that one of the 13 couldn't get round to filling in a form for the people that provide funding to them, but also some of the approaches that were adopted to reduce costs. I mean, you know, things like supervision and appraisals and team meetings being paid at a lower rate than living wage. I mean, these are just integral parts of working in any responsible business. So, you know, I think we need to encourage the firms to take on these principles, but we also need to be prepared to enforce them. We need to audit them, and where we find that there's failure, we need to be prepared to act, because you know, we speak a lot about respecting the contribution of people who work in the care sector. I think I need more to be assured that we're doing that. And I mean, you know, Jim makes good points about union recognition and so forth, but frankly, regardless of that, these are things that any responsible employer should be doing. So I think we need to keep on top of this, but, you know, well done for pulling the paper together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's my 60th birthday today, and I can go back 40 years to when I started working in care for the London Borough of Ealing. And all the stuff that's detailed here, all that they're not doing. I mean, I was paid for training 40 years ago, paid for travel between different jobs 40 years ago, paid for the, you know, during the induction process, which is an essential part of your employment 40 years ago. So really, 40 years later, if all these things aren't happening in Dundee, we really need to get on the case and make sure that they get their act together and make the improvements that we should be demanding of them. Martin Sloan is next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Couple of things on this report. First one, the organisation that hasn't filled in the form should be named. We should be able to hold these organisations to account for not providing us with important information if we're providing them money to enable them to conduct their services. But on the second point, on 4.2, the bullet points, I wonder if there's an opportunity to change the language here a little bit, because it says on pretty much every bullet point, providers should be providing something, should be doing something. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to be able to change that language to be a bit more stronger, to say providers must or must ensure that whatever is being requested of them is done. I don't know if that's is something available or not, but I think that's something we should be looking at.
I'll maybe bring Jenny in on that comment.
I'm going to come back in on two. The first one, I'm not going to name the organisation, but just to say we are addressing that with the particular organisation. I agree that if we're commissioning with people, we should be able to get access to information. In relation to the would versus should, we wouldn't be in a position to enforce that on the current contract. So what we're doing with relation to the next commissioning cycle is looking legally at what can and can't be enforced to see how we word that, Martin.
I thought that was the case, but I just thought it was right that we should be as much as we can making sure that providers are doing what they're doing, and I feel the word should allows a lot of flexibility, a lot of, well, we really should we be doing that? I don't know. I think if we said you must do this, then it gives the providers a lot less opportunity to worm their way out of things. And as the chair said in his comments, a lot of what it's been was also the items in 4.2. The chair was getting paid when he was a young man 40 years ago. I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah, and obviously there's a perspective that would be put forward from Scottish Care if they were here about the reasons behind that. So it is about us trying to understand the barriers to some of this as well with providers.
Yeah, true.
She said politically.
The next opportunity in 2022 to incorporate the principles is, sorry, I just saw a comment that made me smile. Is that as of the new financial year, April onwards? Yeah. Jen.
That's when the contracts are due up, but because of the pandemic, we might be struggling to make that time scale. So we might have to roll them on a bit to allow us to do the work properly, because I think it'll be important to get it right rather than do it quickly.
Yep. Can I bring in Dave Berry, please, who may have something to add?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, just kind of adding to what Jenny was saying there. One of the issues we've got under the contracting arrangements is that it is quite difficult to enforce a lot of things that aren't actually kind of legal. So I kind of enshrined in legislation. So for instance, the move over the last few years to kind of implement the Scottish living wage has actually, we've been able to do it, but providers are not obliged to do it because it's not a kind of legislative kind of figure that they can put in place. So it has resulted in some challenges, not necessarily in Dundee, but I know in other parts of the country where it's been more challenging to implement. But for the reasons that have been said in terms of kind of better recruitment, you would expect organisations to be looking to see how attractive they can be as an employer to attract kind of social care staff to their organisation. So as Jenny says, for the 22-23 onwards in terms of the contract, we'll look to see in terms of the approach around the contract and what we can do around that. To kind of enforce what we can, but then encourage strongly for some of the other aspects that are not kind of legal, not enshrined in sort of legislation as well.
Yeah, that's interesting to know. Raymond Marshall, please.
Thanks, Chair. I was really to echo some of the stuff that Jim was saying and sort of add a little bit, I welcome this paper. I think it's obviously it's very supportive of trade unions as well to try and ensure that we have well supported staff within these providers. I think just to note that often what's hidden within these is their figures, particularly around training and turnover of staff, which reflects then how well they support their staff. I was just going to add the same as what Jim was saying, is that it's about perceptions as well. I think gone are the days, Jim,
we're just walking and bang on tables. You know what I mean? I think we're a bit more pleasant now. We knock on your door or ring your doorbell. So, but I'm happy to be involved in anything that helps to sort of educate or inform the providers around what the benefits, as Jim's described, around having trade unions. As Jim's quite well put, is that often areas that are unionised or do have unions involved are a better environment for the staff, and they end up that therefore will benefit what they're trying to provide. So ultimately, the winner at the end of that would be the person who's been supported by that provider. So yeah, I welcome the paper and the conversations that we've had to develop it a wee bit. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Raymond. And 40 years ago, I was a member of the union too in my caring role. I think it was NALGO, long since disbanded. And finally, can we go to Councillor Short?
Thank you, Chair. It was actually Mr. Berry that opened the door for me. As a member of the Living Wage Steering Group for making Dundee a living wage city, we're obviously partners with NHS, and we do have people from the NHS on the call, and it would be fabulous if NHS Tayside could come out and be a living wage accredited employer. It would really sort of set the city up largely to encompass such a huge employer in the area. So it's just a wee plug if you're on the NHS perhaps and you're listening. I would really appreciate if you brought that forward, Raymond. Et al. Thank you.
Raymond, do you wish to respond?
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to say, I'm happy to pick up. I mean, the Jennifer changed terms and conditions deliver. My understanding is they deliver a living wage. So I thought that there was that agreement, but there's not. Happy to link up with you and see what we can do.
Brilliant. Could we take it offline? Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's there's no further hands. This is for noting, but I do look forward to hearing about any advances that are made following the renegotiation of the contractual arrangements, providing I'm still on the IJB, because anything could happen in May. So that's the council elections. I might be removed from office. But yeah, that's for noting. Thanks everyone for their contributions there. Can we move on, please, Willie?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. With that item being noted, it takes you on to item 12, the Strategic and Commissioning Plan Statutory Review. You're asked to give the recommendations.
Yeah, is this Vicky or Dave going to speak to this?
Catherine's going to take this one.
Sorry, Catherine.
I'll keep it brief in the interest of time. So this paper concludes a series of papers that have come to the IJB over the last year in relation to the requirement to undertake a statutory review of our strategic and commissioning plan, and it sets out in quite a bit of detail the process that the Strategic Planning Advisory Group has been through, both to undertake a desktop review of the existing plan, but also importantly to consult with our stakeholders, including members of the public, in relation to the recommendation that's in front of the IJB today. Just in terms of engagement, I'll make a brief comment on that. So section 4.4 of the report sets out some of the detail about how that's been undertaken through sessions with organisational stakeholders and our public survey, and later in the report and in the appendices some of the detail of that is also included. I think it's important to know that we acknowledge, as we did with members of the public during the engagement process, that there were some significant limitations to our ability to engage with them around the review of the plan. Some of that was in relation to our own staffing capacity, but more significantly, clearly, the timing of that engagement was across the period in which the Omicron variant was escalating in Dundee, and that impacted on both staff and members of the public in terms of their ability to engage over that period. We're also very conscious that because of the escalating pandemic position, that we relied heavily on digital means for engagement in line with public health guidance. And although we did offer alternative routes, and Joyce Barclay, who's on the call, led a lot of that activity and was very flexible and proactive about offering alternatives to some of the digital methods, that will have been a limitation as well. And we think it's important that we acknowledge that with the board. But in spite of that, there was good engagement and feedback from a number of stakeholders and from members of the public, and Joyce is continuing with other colleagues in the service now that we're able to meet face to face with some groups to gather public views to continue to inform our work in the strategic plan. But in summary, the report is recommending on behalf of the Strategic Planning Advisory Group that in the most part our existing plan, in their view, remains fit for purpose in terms of the overall framework, the vision and the strategic priorities. And it's therefore their recommendation that the plan is extended for a further 1-year period until the 31st of March 2023, but with some revisions made in terms of the action plans that support each strategic priority, because inevitably after the 3-year period we've just been through, those are no longer up to date and don't really reflect our current remobilisation and strategic kind of care group priorities. In alignment with that as well, last time we reviewed our equality outcomes and mainstreaming framework, we brought that into line with our planning cycles for the overall strategic plan. And again, the advisory group feels that it would be sensible to continue that approach. And as such, they're recommending that the IJB also extends the equality outcomes and mainstreaming framework for a further year. If that's agreeable to the IJB, we will do that work to revise the actions and bring forward a revised plan to the 20th of April IJB for final sign-off, and that will support the work of the partnership over the 2022-23 financial year. But also then we will move on to think about the need to prepare a fuller replacement plan for the period from April 2023 onwards and all the activity that will be involved in that. I think that's all that's helpful to say by way of introduction, and clearly happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. I think those recommendations are entirely sensible. I see no hands up. Are we happy to agree the recommendations from 2.1 to 2.4? Yep, that's a yes. So thank you for Don. Oh no, just a thumbs up from Donald. I thought he was putting his hand up. Thanks for that innovative way of responding, Donald. Yeah, can we move on, please, given that that's been agreed, to the next item?
Thanks, you're right. Next item is item 13, prevention of homelessness duties. This is for noting it's an agenda note.
Yes. This is about the new commitment to eradicate rough sleeping and give greater responsibilities to agencies. Does anyone want to speak to this?
Me again. I'll not make any significant detail in the comment on the detail which I think is set out in the agenda note, other than just to update the board to say that there's an officer from the strategy and performance team who is going to take a lead on consultation locally with stakeholders to inform a response. There's also a lead that's been identified in the Council's Neighbourhood Services Division and Children and Families. So those 3 officers will work together to look at gathering local stakeholder views and drafting a response back on the consultation, which is obviously quite extensive. The timing of the deadline for that and the next IJB meeting will not allow us to bring that back to you as part of a formal IJB meeting, but of course we will be able to share the draft as that develops and offer IJB members the opportunity to look at that and to make comment, but it will go as a submission from the Chief Officer on behalf of the Health and Social Care Partnership because of the timing in relation to that, but you will get opportunity for comment.
Yeah, it's 31st of March, and we won't meet again till April. Although we'll have the budget meeting before then. I don't know if we could add that if it's felt to be important enough as an additional item just to consider briefly. I think that may be useful given the importance of trying to solve the issue of homelessness, which was actually what brought me to Dundee in the first place. I came here in 1996 to work as part of the government's Rough Sleepers Initiative, which aimed to eliminate rough sleeping by 2002, as I remember. And now we're talking about, what is it, 2023 in the report? It was certainly not 2002, because that's well in the past now. So yeah, really important consultation, and I'm glad that we're all working together on providing a response. As I say, we could bring it as a very brief item as an adjunct to the budget meeting if felt necessary. A couple of hands up. I'll bring in Annie first, and then Trudy.
Hi Ken. Just while we're talking about homelessness, I sent an email to you and Vicky and a few of us this morning around the consultation that's being done around inequalities in Scotland. And I wondered if it's for you as the chair to have a think about it, if we might have a development session that looks at what's going on in Dundee, because as an IJB member, I'm still not aware, but more importantly, what could we do in the future? And for me, that encompasses homelessness and rough sleeping. So I just thought I would interject at this point because it seemed to be a good point to raise the inequalities consultation that's going on just now. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Trudy, please.
Yeah, I just had a wee comment to make, Catherine. Homelessness or impending homelessness is happening to a lot of people because of the pandemic and losing their employment and all sorts of things. So increasingly it's going to be a bigger problem than it is at the moment. At the moment it is still a big problem. But I wonder, because of the impact of this homelessness or impending homelessness on mental health, I wonder if there's a plan at all to include the listening service, which are in all our GP practices, as a means of pointing people who are distressed due to this to the correct people. And perhaps the listening services, they're just a pointing service. They wouldn't deal with the homelessness, but what they could do is give people information about who to contact, numbers, contact names, things like that, to give them support. I just felt that might be a useful way to alleviate some of the stress that these people are feeling.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think that would be an issue with quite a lot of people who would approach the listening service, because homelessness isn't just about rough sleeping, and we don't actually, rough sleeping levels are very low in Dundee, but there would be a lot of people who are sofa surfing, staying with friends, who are in temporary accommodation, and whose mental health will be suffering as a result of that high level of insecurity in their lives. And it's important that they're signposted to the right agencies, because the homelessness legislation in Scotland is actually very progressive. Any person who is homeless, the local authority have an absolute duty, unless they're intentionally homeless, which is hardly ever the case. The council have an absolute duty to provide temporary accommodation pending permanent accommodation. And this report, sorry, it's not a report, it's an agenda note, talks about transforming the use of temporary accommodation. We're already moving well down that road in Dundee. There's much less use of hostel accommodation now than there used to be. One of the big hostels in Soapwater Lane closed some time ago, and it's now been converted into accommodation for young people who I believe are at risk of homelessness. I think that's a Hillcrest initiative. So a lot has been going on to ensure that the support for people who are homeless and are at risk of homelessness has been improved, and that the actual physical bricks and mortar accommodation is more suitable for their needs too. Catherine, you want to come in there?
Yeah, just in agreement, and a lot of the initial discussions with stakeholders, and particularly the Homelessness Partnership about this, has highlighted just that point that Dundee already has quite progressive arrangements in place, really strong partnerships between housing, third sector, health and social care services. So a lot of what's reflected in here is they believe can be achieved without the need for legislative change. And I think there's a real appetite to reflect some of that back in the consultation response in terms of what innovative work has been able to be achieved in Dundee on the basis of best practice, rather than needing legislative change necessarily to support that. So some of your comments have absolutely been reflected in what kind of local stakeholders and providers have been saying already.
Great. Joyce, would you like to come in, please? Joyce Barclay. Then I'll bring in Councillor Short.
Yeah, really similar to what Catherine was saying was what I was going to say, but the reality is, although this is a very dense consultation paper with lots of stuff in it, the reality, one of the really good realities is the kind of notion that Trudy had, that it could be everybody's business to check whether somebody is at risk of homelessness. And that's not just about a risk tomorrow of homelessness, but a longer term, you know, like, so if somebody is heading down a path that risks homelessness within the next 6 months, the proposal is that actually staff at all levels and all areas pick up on that. Then it will require, just as Trudy says, them to have a kind of information pack about how you would help that person. But I think some of the ideas are really good, and I think there'll be good practice. Definitely, it's not an area I'm usually involved in, but I heard from the homelessness meeting of the good practice that's already happening in Dundee that's covering some of the points. And do we need legislation, or is it, you know, do we need carrots rather than sticks? So it's very dense paper for you to have a read at when you get a chance.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Short.
Yeah, it was just you mentioning dates, Chair. I came back to Dundee in 2002 and I was that sofa surfer. And I think that's one of the things about this city. We are very much of lived experience right across the board. And it's really important that we do kind of recognise these things, that these things happen to everyone. And I remember rolling up to the Lily Walker Centre trying to get somewhere for me and my son. And, you know, I was in a situation that I was incredibly lucky because I had parents who still to this day help me with my deposits when I move from house to house. But not everybody in the city has that opportunity. So it is really, really important that we keep recognising that the problems are there. They may have moved and changed in different ways, but we need to keep going until everybody does have that security of a home of their own and understanding just how important that is. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Councillor Short. I think that's just for this meeting's gone on so long. I'm starting to get confused where I am.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Agnes, for noting
that. We've agreed the next steps, and that email will be sent out to members, and with the possibility, if necessary, of a short item added to the budget meeting. So next item, please.
Item 14 is on the agenda notes, the revision of Dundee Health and Social Care Integration Scheme, also for noting.
Anyone like to speak to Councillor Short? Is your hand still up, or Dave's going to speak to this? No.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll be brief on this one. It's kind of quite self-explanatory. This is an update following our last kind of update back in August around the revision of the integration schemes that have been undertaken by the statutory partners, and some of us have been involved from a kind of an IJB perspective to provide some technical advice and lived experience advice of how things have worked over the last 5 or 6 years of integration. I understand that the Tayside Chief Execs met last week to consider the kind of proposed revised version of the scheme. I think there's still a couple of wee outstanding issues that they're kind of dealing with at the moment, but the intention is that they will take the revised schemes through their respective governance bodies over the course of kind of March, possibly tipping into April, to enable the public consultation exercise that's required as part of the revision of the integration schemes to be undertaken. As part of that process, as in the IJB, we will get the opportunity to then kind of comment on the kind of the changes to the scheme, and the scheme needs to be with Scottish ministers by the end of June of this year for formal approval. So we will get kind of sight of the changes, and then what that we'll kind of review with you and kind of point out any of the significant impacts that may have on the IJB and the way we currently do our business as a result of those changes.
Thank you. Is there any questions? No. I note that quite a few people have either left or are having to leave, but we have to continue. We've still got some important items on the agenda here. And I think it was important that there was a lot of interest in the items earlier on, MAPA arrangements and the children's services inspections and improvements, etc. So I make no apology for the 3-hour meeting, although It's not ideal, especially when people have to leave. Can we move on to item 15, Willie?
Yeah, thanks. With that item having been noted, item 15 is the psychology therapy services strategic update. We ask to give the recommendations.
Yeah.
So Lynn, I'll cover that one if that's okay.
Yep.
It's Diane. Yeah, unfortunately, this is a paper provided by Arlene Mitchell, which is unable to be here today. So I'll just briefly introduce it, but I'm really pleased to say that Linda Graham, who is our current clinical director for services around mental health and learning disability, is also here, but Linda is also covering as our director of psychological therapy services and psychotherapy services at this point as we're going through recruitment. So the paper's with you today because Dundee hosts for Tayside the psychological therapy services and the psychotherapy services, and as such we ensure that the services are delivered. If you were looking at Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, you'd very quickly realise that the length and breadth of services delivered in terms of the number of specialities is really quite significant in terms of the number of areas that these services actually reach into. I'm also really pleased to say that where heat targets are in place, we're doing particularly well in terms of ensuring that we're meeting that to the best of our ability. One of the things that we need to do is really look at how we deliver these services and where we do that, and how we ensure that the resources that we've currently got and those we're recruiting to are actually kind of provided and making the biggest and the best impact. And as part of the work that we want to deliver is we want to develop a strategic commissioning plan for psychological therapy services and psychotherapy services, which will start to identify where our priorities are, where we need to dedicate our resources, how we deliver that work, and actually ensuring that we are covering everything that we need to cover. Recruitment remains a challenge in this area, although there has been additional funding coming in nationally. As with other services, there are challenges around to make sure that we deliver in the areas we want to deliver, and particularly considering coming out of the pandemic, we anticipate there being higher levels of support required going forward. So the paper is really there to give a quick update in terms of where we are with these services. A lot of work been going on recently to ensure that we are managing to improve our performance in this area, to confirm that we're going to develop a strategic commissioning plan around this service area, and give a reassurance that we'll bring that back in the future. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I will most likely defer to Linda.
Yeah, I find the report really interesting, particularly as you said, the appendix, which details all the different specialties. It was really interesting to read. I didn't realise that there was such a broad spectrum of specialties in psychology. Are there any questions for Linda? I don't think there are, Linda. Sorry. But we're asked to note the contents, and more importantly, we're asked to approve the proposal to develop a strategic and commissioning plan for psychological therapies. I'm certainly in agreement with that. Yep, everyone else is. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. That item being agreed, item 16, employees of supporting people with learning disabilities strategic update report. You're asking the recommendations.
I'll present that one again, Ken.
Yep,
so again, another piece of work being done through Arlene and her team. So we have had learning disability strategic plans, and we have an active strategic planning group that has been around for many years now. Just prior to the pandemic, there was a huge amount of work to engage with adults with learning disabilities in order to think through what might be a refresh plan look like, and how might that best actually kind of be presented, both for people who it would be relevant to, but also kind of moving forward in terms of our approaches. Unfortunately, as a result of the pandemic, we ended up with a gap between our initial engagement plan and development work. That's proved quite difficult to do remotely in terms of continuing that level of engagement that we would normally do, but things are starting to be put in place again in order to take that forward. So again, the paper's presented demonstrating that we're looking to bring forward a strategic and commissioning plan for adults with learning disability and autism, and move that forward over the next few months in terms of our engagement. But the report also highlights some of the work that's going on at a Teesside level, and this is in response to Living Life Well, the Dr. Strang report, which looked at mental health and learning disabilities across Teesside. And it particularly highlights the work going on at a Teesside level around multidisciplinary approaches towards complex needs, where we know that that requires a much more multidisciplinary approach. It also looks at some of the work we're doing in terms of positive behavioural support, and also how we might consider joint commissioning kind of services for people who fall into that group. And then lastly, the report talks about the neurodiversity conditions, which don't always sit comfortably within particular frameworks, but how we will look to ensure that those presenting with those particular needs actually have a way into services and support. And I can see that Joyce has come up on the screen, and Joyce is our expert when it comes to engaging with adults with learning disability and autism. And again, I'm sure we'd be happy to contribute to any questions that might be asked. Yep. The last thing I'm going to say is, because I can just spotted Martin there, is that actually the paper gives a commitment to having really high focus in regards to carers and families through the iteration of the plan. Thank you.
Can I bring in Martin, please?
Very briefly, Chair. My questions are relating to Appendix 2, which is on page 247. You have some items listed that are going to complete in mid-March. Do you feel you can complete them in that time frame, or is, because we're now coming to the end of February and it's only a couple more weeks into, we'll be coming to mid-March, so.
Okay, it's obviously not reached to Martin by email, but I've been trying to get it out as much as I can. Not everybody's always interested in what I send, unfortunately. But yeah, I've arranged an online session, and that's going to be on Teams. People can join it. It is an information session rather than a big discussion session. And it's really to say, come on board to help this process. So it's primarily aimed at the workforce, but carers or whoever else can also watch it. What it won't be is in a format that's aimed at people with learning disability and autism, because the rest of the work will do that. So I've already engaged a couple of people who will engage in the engagement process. One of them is Jessie Baxter at the Carers Centre. The other one, one of the other ones is Bernie Brophy-Arnott at Speech and Language Therapy. And one of the other ones is Pam Brown, who's one of the integrated managers, particularly with responsibility for learning disabilities. So I'm hoping to pull them together and put them into shape quickly, Martin.
Okay.
Trudy?
Thank you, Chair. Joyce, when I joined the IJB, I was told that the numbers of people living in Dundee with learning disability is larger than the rest of Scotland. And that was entirely down to the fact that the provision for care and support for learning disability has been recognised by other people. So people move into the area specifically for that support. Is that still the case?
I think there are a number of reasons why those numbers are high. And one of them is that children and young people traditionally went to Kings Park School, wherever they came from, fairly locally. And where do young people want to live? They don't want to be living out in Arbroath or Castlegowrie, as we mentioned earlier. Young people want housing in Dundee. So that independent movement where they got their own houses, young people were looking to be in Dundee. Dundee and Angus College really promotes that as well, because again, there's a good college facility and their friends are in Dundee. I believe, and I can say this because it's not my service, but I actually believe that the learning disability and autism services in Dundee are pretty good at keeping track of folks. They don't lose them and let them lose out. Perhaps if you're in a bigger area and moving 10 miles makes you somebody else's responsibility. So that would be my reasoning.
Thank you, Joyce. I thought it was important to mention that for the benefit of those who are new to the IJB, just to let them see how very dedicated and supportive your team are. But also I was very pleased to hear you talk about carers and their families, because I've spoken to a few carers of people with learning disability, including adults with learning disability. And the carer's role is so important, but it's so difficult at times.
We very much hope that we'll go out to where carers are rather than hosting a load of meetings and expecting carers to pitch up. So I think that's really, and we know that the pandemic has very affected carers and have very affected carers of this group, because they're not carers just for a short number of years. It's lifelong often.
Okay, so the recommendations, 3 of them are just for noting, but 2.4 in the recommendations remits to the Chief Officer to bring back a final draft strategic and commissioning plan for approval in August of this year. So we look forward to seeing that in August, as long as that's not too ambitious, Joyce.
I think Arlene and Diane will take responsibility for that, but yeah. I'll just do my best to help.
Yeah. So can we agree that? Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. Taking on to item 17, the agenda note, community wellbeing centre development. This is for noting.
Diane, would you like to?
Yes, certainly, thank you. Members of the IJB will be aware that one of the big pieces of work being done this last year or so has been around the development of the Community Wellbeing Centre. Our original thoughts were that we would be able to manage to have this up and running by the spring of this year. Unfortunately, like a lot of other things, we've been impacted in terms of COVID, both in regards to the ability for Hillcrest to be able to progress the work that they need to progress in order to get the building up and running. That's no one's fault. That's just the reality of building work at this particular point in time. But a couple of positive things to come out of that further delay. Firstly, huge amount of work going on with stakeholders in order to allow their voices to be heard, to influence, to co-design the model of support that will actually be provided within the centre. And that's allowed us to do both public consultation as well as work with the stakeholder group which are there. And some people will have seen the news around this on STV, and I have to say we were delighted that actually a number of family members who were part of the work and calling for this kind of setting were actually very positive about the approach that is being taken. So we were pleased about that. Hillcrest are doing their absolute best to work with us to make sure that we can get this up and running as quickly as we can. And they're trying to address whatever limitations in terms of processes that are around. We set a target date for August. That's the target date that we would be wanting to work to. If there's any further changes to that, if we continue to have issues, we absolutely will ensure that we come back and let people know in terms of any other kind of impact that might have or might be presenting. But collectively, we're working really hard to ensure that we can smooth the way to get this up and running as quickly as possible. I think that would be all I'd want to say, Ken, but happy for, again, I can see Linda coming on screen to take any questions.
Trudy?
Quite excited by this community, by this development. The Community Wellbeing Hub is so wanted by the people of Dundee, and I as Lynn are involved with the Fairness Commissioners, and they're really keen to get this in. Can I just ask, I know you have done huge stakeholder engagements on a repeated basis and continuing basis. But before I leave, can I just make sure that you continue to do that even when the centre is open, so that the centre does what the stakeholders need? So I would like to see a continuous process of stakeholder engagement and just making sure that it's doing what the stakeholders who are using it need.
So I would say quite confidently that that would be part of the ongoing process, especially at the beginning. But we do have stakeholders engaged with our strategic planning group, Trudy. So even through that forum, we would be looking to monitor the impact and any further work that needs to be done.
Can I bring in Martin Sloan, please?
Thanks, Chair. Very briefly, in terms of the item on this agenda, I'm quite positive about it because I attended the 2 development sessions on Monday and Tuesday of this week, and there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy on the online chats about all the different aspects of what has been discussed. So much so that I've joined the key stakeholder group as well, just to make sure that there's a carer representation there and making sure that the carer's voice has been heard. So yeah, I just wanted to say it's a very positive piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you've joined that group, Martin. Eric?
I think this is one of the most significant developments in Dundee for a long time. There's going to be a huge amount of expectation, and that stakeholder group is going to be so important. And always managing expectation as well of when it opens up and what it's going to be like. So I think it's a huge development. Just a shame I'm not going to see it all through. So yeah, very positive. I'm pleased Martin's on the group as well. He always adds that common sense.
Annie?
I'm still catching up. Where is it going to be?
It's going to be in South Ward Road. It's a building which is owned by Hillcrest. Hillcrest are a very important partner in this process, given that it's their building. And I really want to highlight the fact, the importance of Hillcrest. So yeah, it's South Ward Road. Yeah.
Thank you.
I see no other hands, so yeah, we'll look forward to hearing what happens next. Can we move on, please, Willie?
Yeah, thanks for the item being noted. Item 18 then is a financial monitoring report. This is for noting.
Okay, Ken, I'll just kind of quickly take us to this one. Yeah, so the report in front of me is the latest financial monitoring position, which is based on the December 2021 spend position. We are anticipating at this stage to have an underspend by the year end of just under £2 million. That doesn't include the impact of COVID, but that expense has risen up to around £8.5 million, mainly due to Omicron and kind of what we've experienced over the last few months. However, between the money we'll have in reserves for specifically for COVID and the guarantees of the additional funding from Scottish Government, there's no risk to us of that becoming a kind of cost pressure to us. The position also doesn't include the impact yet of the additional funding that was provided by Scottish Government kind of in terms of winter funding, which was announced kind of way back in October. So it's going to quite a significant amount of money was allocated to health and social care to deliver an increased capacity. So we're trying to kind of work our way through the commitments against the funding, but it's likely that we will have some year-end budget flexibility against that resource. I will not have spent it all at that stage. And actually just yesterday we got a letter from Scottish Government confirming that we can use that funding, anything we've not spent, kind of flexibly, and indeed are expecting us to roll that into next year as part of our reserves as well. The funding, so the position also of kind of £2 million underspent doesn't kind of reflect any potential liability of a share of the inpatient mental health overspend, for which the NHS Tayside is currently projecting in terms of an overall overspend. And at the moment, there's discussions ongoing between the three chief finance officers within the Tayside IJBs and Director Finance of NHS Tayside of a kind of fair share approach to how we kind of manage that particular overspend within this year, and indeed in terms of kind of moving into future years. So the position is looking favourable for us at this stage. Kind of unlike me, I'm kind of pretty relaxed around the overall position, given where we are at the moment. But obviously, we'll continue to monitor spend over the coming weeks to the year end, and kind of make sure that any other risks are kind of flagged up appropriately.
Trudy?
I'm pleased to hear you say that there's continuing conversations with the financial directors and the other IJB financial officers as well. I'm looking at 4.3.6, Dave, and I know that I did email you and got quite a detailed reply from you about the inpatient mental health services, which are also a delegated function to Tayside IJBs. But I feel that it's important just to mention this, that there is an impact in late 1920, the operational and financial management of these services were transferred to NHS Tayside. But under the integration scheme, the strategic planning is our responsibility. So We're just recognising now that the financial responsibility will be returned to the IJBs and it may have an impact on our balance.
Can I just comment in terms of that? So you're absolutely right that the strategic planning responsibility for the IJB doesn't go away with the kind of shift to operational management, in particular to NHS Tayside. This is a bit of a different, because NHS Tayside operationally manage that service. It's not managed through the health and social care partnerships. We need to consider how that risk can be then kind of shared, financial risk can be shared fairly across the partners in relation to this particular issue, because with every other service, say we're directly managing as a health. So the IJB through the Chief Officer is managing through the Health and Social Care Partnership all the other delegated services. But decisions on operational management and therefore what may impact in terms of the financial position of inpatient mental health services are not currently sitting with the Chief Officers and through the IJB. So that's what we're working through just now to try and kind of untangle that one in particular. See if Vicky wants to come in.
Yeah. Vicky?
Yeah, I don't think I've really got much more to add to Dave's comments, particularly emphasising that, you know, we're still having system-wide discussions in relation to what we described the treatment of this overspend from a Chief Officer perspective, and I'm sure the same is the case from Dave as the Chief Finance Officer. We have to ensure that where there is a legitimate overspend and that we have an element of risk through the IJB as a result of our strategic commissioning responsibilities, that we've had full line of sight of that. But moreover, that actually we've had some direction and control of both the operational and financial management arrangements. Now, I don't think we're in a position to say that we've had that level of or that line of sight for the last 2 years, which is why there's quite a debate at the moment about the treatment of that overspend. And certainly, I think many people, whether right or wrong, assumed that when the operational responsibility rested with the NHS board, that there would be an accountability in terms of the financial management of that as well, and ultimately the management of the risk associated with it. However, the only way for us to be able to recover the position across all mental health services is for us to have an upfront and a collective strategic approach to the future of mental health. That involves investing more in community services if we want the inpatient services to start to resemble a service that is sustainable for the future and that certainly doesn't have the voids that we're currently seeing in terms of overall financial resource. And alongside that goes a requirement for both Dave and I to ensure that we protect and grow the mental health services that we have available across the communities in Dundee. There is a risk that if you transfer an overspend from an inpatient environment, you actually put that very development at risk as well. So we're trying to ensure that the whole system understands exactly where the risks are, but also has a really good understanding of where the investment needs to be. So hopefully we'll get those discussions concluding over the next few weeks.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Can I come back on that? And I think that's the whole raison d'etre for integration, getting care in the community, and preventive care is really very important. Preventive and supportive care is very important before people get to the stage where they have to go to an inpatient facility. So I think this is key, that we need the funding to be in balanced budget. We need it so that we can support the population of Dundee in their mental ill health.
See no other hands. Thank you for that. This is for Pat. Yeah.
Am I allowed to speak, Ken?
I said you weren't, but no, just go ahead. Just keep it short, though.
No, I'm just going to back up what Trudy said, and I agree with Vicky about being in the line of sight. And there's something there about, you know, working together to understand what the risks are and what the financial transfer of risk is, and at what point, you know, that moves across. And I think maybe that's got a bit lost in translation. I can only assume. But just to reinforce what Trudy's saying, I mean, 90%, if you look at the statistics about where mental health takes place, 90% of mental health provision for our patients, for Dundee patients, will take place in the community. Only a very small number, it's often less than 10% of patients ever end up being admitted to an inpatient facility. So as Vicky says, as Trudy says, if you get that community service right and we've got the right resources, then it would actually reduce the number of admissions to Carsview. So that would be a good thing for everybody, for the patients, for the system, and for the people that need our help in the community. So I think that's that's the ultimate aim and objective here.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Pat. I think we'll move on now, given the time. This is for noting. So yeah, next item, I think, is the final item.
Thanks. Your item 19 is the budget development update. You're asking recommendations.
Yeah. I don't think it's a particularly complicated paper, but
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think well, hopefully the report itself is kind of pretty self-explanatory. I know it kind of certainly builds on the budget development sessions that we've had. I appreciate not everybody present today will have been there, but it kind of hopefully gives a good overview of where the budget is at the moment. We do have, as you'll be well aware, the council sets its budget tomorrow afternoon. So once that the budget is kind of finalised from the council's perspective, that kind of helps us to kind of move on with our own kind of budget process, because we'll then have the certainty in terms of the funding from the kind of local authority side. We'll have some further clarity in terms of some of the detail of the finance settlement as it kind of stands for health and social care partnerships as well. There's been a lot of kind of additional funding being announced, that's I understand is to be incorporated into the finance settlement. So again, that'll give some of the figures that we're pretty sure we've got will be kind of finalised, so we'll be able to incorporate that into the budget process as well. We do have another budget development session next week for the IJB, and then that'll kind of hopefully set us up nicely for a budget to be set at the end of March for the IJB. So I don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to add to that.
Don't think there is anything to add. So I think we can now move on to the last. No, it wasn't the last item, but the last two are just attendance. Yeah, but
committee's attendance for noting. And then lastly, you've got the date of the next meeting, which is the budget meeting on 25th of March, 10 a.m.
I'm sorry. I'm just throwing bombs into the pitch at the moment. I'm looking at the distribution list. When I went to attendance, I looked at the distribution list, and I note there are only 2 proxy members from NHS appointments, and there are 3 proxy members for the council. So I wonder if that can maybe be rectified, Willie, and we can get an extra one from NHS Tayside.
Thanks very much. That's a matter for NHS to decide at this time.
Right, okay, I'll take that up with the chair of NHS Tayside then. I just wasn't sure about the direction for that one.
We've never needed a proxy for you, Trudy, because I think your attendance has been at 100%.
I know, that's because I can't keep my nose out of business.
I think that's going to be absent more often than you then. Sure not. So I'm all cheerful now because the meeting's finally at an end and I can enjoy what's left of my birthday. So thanks everyone for your attendance. It's been a good meeting, lots of questions asked, and it's not looking too bad for the budget meeting next month, so I won't be losing too much sleep over that. So thanks everyone and see you soon. Bye.
Happy birthday, Ken.
Thank you.